Chapter 768. Let's see their performance. Temple. Dean answered Riley's question. He got up and put on the splitting armor, which was made from the hardest bones of the Great Splitter's body. He walked out of the temple. Riley pondered for a moment. Master, won't Noise expose our second base if we let him come over? If they send someone to follow you? Dean looked at him. It's a good idea, but it doesn't matter if the second base is exposed. They won't dare to act rashly if the person they want isn't there. Although the second base was hidden, but he knew that it would be easy for them to find it if they wanted to. Moreover, he was happy to let them know the location. You stay and hand over to Noise. Yes, master. Be careful on the way. The wings on Dean's back stretched out from the gap of the armor. He flapped his wings and flew in the direction of the sighing wall. It didn't take long for Dean to arrive at the inner wall. He found the central base of the intelligence network. It was located on the edge of the city under the protection of the Earl. The intelligence personnel immediately recognized him. Master, Dragon Clan and Rock Clan have rejected our invitation. The Wing Clan hasn't received the news yet. After a simple greeting, several people immediately reported to Dudian. Dean slightly raised his eyebrows. Dragon and Rock family have refused? Why? They didn't say why. I know. Dean turned and left the place. He flew out of here and stayed in the King's City. He was surprised that the Dragon family refused. After all, Aisha was the one who invited him. Moreover, Haley was in his hands. Why would the Dragon family refuse to cooperate with him? Did they know about Aisha's situation? Even if they knew, didn't they want to see her? Dean quietly drank a glass of the most expensive amber wine from the pub's owner. He could understand why the Rock family refused to cooperate. After all, their nest was destroyed by him. They wouldn't easily withdraw their forces to guard their nest. After all, the demon instrument was their foundation. Even though it wasn't destroyed this time, they should be scared. Little friend, move. A rude voice interrupted Dean's thoughts. Dudian glanced and saw a burly man. He was ugly, but he wore a big gold bracelet on his wrist. He was wearing a fluffy robe. It seemed that he had a good family background. He frowned and said in a cold voice, Get lost. Huh? Kid, you? The burly man raised his thick eyebrows and stretched out his hand, wanting to scold him. Dean didn't wait for him to continue to be verbose. He slapped the burly man's body. The burly man's body rolled a few times and fell to the ground. Dean took off the gold bracelet from his wrist and threw it on the counter. Wine money. He went out of the tavern. He went to a nearby hotel with the name of a noble and booked a suite. He took out the god's marrow and injected it into his body. He stopped injecting the god's marrow into his body. Time flew by. In the blink of an eye, Dean stayed in the hotel for 2 days. He walked around the city and saw the destroyed palace. The whole palace was in a mess. There were several holes in the middle of the stairs. Although the scene had been surrounded and there were a lot of wall builders repairing it, but it was not difficult to imagine what kind of war had broken out at that time. Dean observed the situation in the palace with thermal vision. He only saw 7 or 8 pioneers. One of them had reached the inner wasteland level. These people were estimated to be most of the remaining forces in the palace. The monastery and the devil family seemed to be fine. What are they doing? Dean frowned. He had been staying in King's City for 2 days. He was always paying attention to the movement in the direction of the palace. At the same time, he spied on various aspects of intelligence. However, the information he got was still about the war in the Padgel Mountains. Moreover, the intelligence didn't mention the defeat of the Dragon family and the royal family. The news should have been blocked to avoid panic. Instead, it was said that the invading rebels had been beheaded. These invaders were defined as rebels in the outer wall according to the information they got from various sources. If they attacked the devil family, then even if the devil family didn't have enough time to spread the news, it should have taken such a long time. If the news was leaked, then the other devil families, the monastery, the magistrate, and other forces were bound to gather together to fight against the enemy. But it wasn't like that. Dean's eyes flashed. It was hard to believe that these people had killed all the people from the devil family and the monastery. After all, although the devil family couldn't compete with them, but they had a large number of people. There were 6 of them in total. No matter how fast they killed, it was impossible for them to not spread the news. unless they sneaked in and assassinated them one by one. However, it was also possible that they didn't take action. Dean thought again and decided to observe for another day. On the third day, the situation in the palace was still as usual. Dean didn't want to wait any longer. He returned to the intelligence center and asked about the reply from the Wing family and the magistrate. Master, the Wing family and the magistrate also refused our invitation. But the King City came to us and said that they are willing to cooperate with us. The intelligence officer said, "The King City wants to cooperate with us?" Dean was surprised. His biggest enemy was the King City. After all, the entire giant wall was under the jurisdiction of the royal family. The outer wall that he divided was the territory of the royal family. But now the only one who was willing to cooperate with him was the royal family. Reply to them that if they are willing to cooperate, they can come to Utopia Mountain in the outer wall to find me. Dean said, "They invited you to meet them in the palace." The intelligence officer said. Dean shook his head. "I won't go. Let them come and see me in my territory." "I know, Speaker." Dean left and returned to the outer wall to wait for the arrival of the royal family. At the same time, he had used up the gods' marrows. Half a day later, at dusk, Noise came to the temple and said to Dean, "Master, there are two people outside who claim to be from the royal family. They want to see you. Let them come up." Dean said. At the same time, he used the heat source to look at the two limitless figures on the steps of Wutuan Mountain. Chapter 769. After a while, Noise led two middle-aged men into the shrine. They looked at the temple and then at Dean, who was sitting on the Pope's throne. The middle-aged man on the left asked, "Are you the person in charge here?" Dean indifferently asked, "Who are you?" The middle-aged man frowned as he saw Dean's arrogant attitude. "I'm Stanley, the minister of the royal palace. The one next to me is Lord Henry. He is the right-hand man of Her Royal Highness Eureka. We have come to discuss cooperation with you. May I ask where Her Royal Highness Aisha is?" After saying that, he glanced at the other places. "She's resting, so it's inconvenient for her to meet the guests. I'm in charge of everything here." Dean quietly looked at him. He knew that this person should be the main person in charge of the meeting. His official position was higher than Lord Henry, who was next to him. Although the palace minister was equivalent to the imperial minister in ancient China and managed all the things in the royal family. But here the palace minister had a wider range of things, including various levels of communication meetings. The people who served as the palace minister were usually Earl level, which was also a higher level. He put away the contempt in his heart and said, "Her Highness Yulida is very appreciative of Her Highness Aisha's character. You must have heard about the attack of the intruders. I won't repeat it. Now the group of intruders have left the giant wall, but there is a possibility that they are lurking in the dark. So, just in case, I hope that Her Highness Aisha can respond to the signs and go to support them the next time they appear." Dean nodded. "Of course. But you know that our outer wall is short of resources. Her Royal Highness Aisha needs God's marrows to enhance her strength. Do you have any idea? By the way, who is Her Royal Highness Eureka?" Eureka is the only daughter of the ruler of the Giant Wall. She is the princess of the Giant Wall. She is replacing the ruler of the Giant Wall to manage the affairs of the Giant Wall. Stanley smiled. "The royal family will naturally provide the god's marrows. I'll send someone to deliver it when I return." "That's fine." Dean nodded. "Her Highness Eureka should know about our temporary occupation of the outer wall. What does she think about it?" Stanley's eyes flashed as he smiled. "Her Highness Eureka has investigated the reason. Her Highness said that we can let bygones be bygones if the cooperation goes well. After all, this is an abandoned barbarian land. Her Highness Aisha wants it, so why not give it to her?" Dean listened to his tone. Her Royal Highness Yulida's image emerged in his mind. She seemed to be a good person. He said, "Your Royal Highness is so generous. We will come to make amends." Stanley smiled faintly and did not comment further. "After talking for so long, aren't you going to give us a chair?" Henry, who was beside him, reminded him with a displeased expression. Dean looked at him and waved a Noise to take a seat. Dean said after both of them sat down, I've heard that the invaders have lost several people. In my opinion, the possibility of them fighting back is very high. I don't know if Her Royal Highness Yulida is prepared. Her Royal Highness is actively preparing. As long as they dare to come, we will catch them off guard. Stanley replied confidently. Dean chuckled in his heart. Most of these words were used to stabilize the morale of the army. The invaders wouldn't be able to withstand a single blow unless they had a dominator. He didn't point it out and continued to talk with them about the royal family. Dean sent them off after half an hour. The conversation went smoothly. Although Henry had a look of disdain in his eyes, Dean didn't care about it. In the face of the big picture, these little people were not worth mentioning unless they did something to interfere with him. It seems that the royal family is already prepared. If that's the case, I don't have to worry anymore. If they can invite me, they should also invite the Witch Clan and the Monster Research Institute. The combat power of a Monster Research Institute is not inferior to a single Witch Clan. Although there aren't many experts in it, the monsters they tamed are not weak. Dean was afraid of the Monster Research Institute. The first time he sneaked into the inner wall, he saw an extremely terrifying monster in the wilderness. It fed on the undeads. In retrospect, most of the monster's strength was at the peak of the outer wasteland. However, it's already been 3 days, yet they still haven't taken any action. It seems like they've learned their lesson from their previous losses. Dean thought. He wasn't worried about the inner wall attacking him in a short time. The longer the delay, the better it would be for him. After all, his power station and saltpeter mines were producing a lot of electricity and fire saltpeter every day. The more time passed, the more savings he would have. The next morning, Dean received 500 bottles of God's marrows from the inner wall. This was beyond his expectation. It wasn't too much, but too little. He had looted thousands of bottles of God's marrows from the Monster Research Institute. It seems that the royal family has sent me away like a beggar. Dean's eyes flashed coldly. He thought that Yulida was a good person, but it seemed that it was wishful thinking. However, his desire for God's marrows wasn't that big. He had a relatively rich reserve of God's marrows after plundering the rocks. It was enough for him to advance to the inner wasteland level. Moreover, Xiao Manson and Poland were producing God's marrows every day, so he didn't need to plunder anymore. Half a month passed in the blink of an eye. Dean absorbed God's marrows every day until his body reached saturation. It was almost the same as he expected. His physique had another breakthrough after half a month of continuous absorption. He had evolved from an ordinary pioneer to the peak of the outer wasteland. He was at the same level as the military god. Moreover, the changes brought about by his physique breakthrough was that his devil body was closer to that of a fiendish devil. His transformed appearance was even more sinister and terrifying, and he had fewer and fewer human characteristics. He estimated that when he reached the inner desolate rank or dominator rank, his body's outer appearance would be completely fiendish. He didn't know what form the Abyssal Walker would take after activating the demonic body, but it should be very distorted and terrifying. I don't know if I can win against an inner wasteland level expert. Dean was eager to try, but his reason told him that the chances of winning weren't too big. Although he had the magic marks of the splitter, but the magic marks of the inner wasteland powerhouses were legendary magic marks. This was the main limitation of the evolution to the inner wasteland. His advantage over the inner wasteland powerhouses was that he had the difference of deification. Deification would stimulate the new ability of the magic marks and also strengthen the original ability. But the difference between the physique of the peak of the outer wasteland and the inner wasteland was enough to offset the advantage of the magic marks. The only thing left was the combat experience and the on-the-spot reaction of both sides. It was hard to predict who would win or lose. I estimate that I will be promoted to the inner wasteland in a month with the current resources and absorption speed. This is the advantage of having a strong foundation. Dean was looking forward to this peaceful time. Nothing major had happened in the outer and inner wall in the last half a month. The group of invaders seemed to have disappeared, but he knew that they were hiding in the dark. He estimated that they were investigating and understanding the giant wall. They weren't as arrogant as before. This was more dangerous. Fortunately, this danger wouldn't come to his head first. Once there was a change in the inner wall, it meant that they would take action. They would try to get rid of the inner wall and find a way to deal with him. Maybe in the last half a month, they had investigated the location of the second base. They also knew about the process of him seizing the outer wall. If I can smoothly promote to the inner wasteland level before the war breaks out, then I can rely on my deification magic mark's ability to fight against the ruler. Dean hoped that the group of invaders would investigate in detail. The longer it dragged on, the better his advantage would be. Moreover, Aisha had suddenly awakened for the 5th time. Maybe it wouldn't be long before she would naturally awaken again. At that time, it would be the 6th awakening. Once she awakened for the 6th time, her combat strength would not be inferior to the ruler. In fact, she would be stronger than the majority of the rulers. If such a thing really happened, then he would have a complete victory. However, he couldn't figure out the natural awakening cycle of Aisha. If he had a microscope, then he could observe the virus fission in his body and calculate it. Time passed, and the giant wall restored its calmness. The military of the inner wall accelerated the speed of the corpses in the cities. The corpses had been completely suppressed by the time Dean had advanced to the outer wasteland level. The inner wall started to restore the cities after the corpses were settled. The refugees were transported back to their respective cities, and order was restored. Everything was like new grass that was growing on a withered prairie. It was tenacious and full of vitality. Dean studied the superchip in addition to absorbing God's marrows every day. He sifted out the extremely effective technological items that could be produced in a short period of time. The atmosphere had become an upright faction in the Temple of Elements of the outer wall. The limelight of the atmosphere had overshadowed the other 9 factions after Barton was appointed as the pontiff. Some mages even called it the new century's invention. With the development of the chi element, it also brought about rapid progress in science and technology. Everything was restless, waiting to flourish. Half a month later, the nuclear haze that shrouded the sky gradually dissipated. The air returned to normal, and the first rain fell after the new year. The black snow season was coming to an end. The rainy season of the new year was coming. I hope that the peace will continue for another half a month. Dean stood in front of the window and smoked. He blew the smoke out of the window and looked at the rain. The distant mountains and St. Mark's Square were shrouded in a blur. He finished the cigarette after a while. He stayed by the window for a while and took a few deep breaths. After dispersing the smoke in his mouth, he returned to the temple's desk. Aisha was sitting quietly on the chair next to him, accompanying him. Dean felt that the calmness at the moment was rare, but he knew that the storm would come and the rain would get heavier. If only I could make the phonograph. Dean looked at Aisha with gentle eyes. His heart was full of regret. If he could make the phonograph, then he would be able to retain her voice. Unfortunately, he was busy with things that could enhance his strength at that time. If it were now, he would rather use 1, or even 10, or even 100 legendary magic to replace a gramophone. But he had missed it. No amount of remedies would be able to bring it back. The heavy rain fell rhythmically on the windows of the temple. It floated over the entire mountain and into the inner wall. The palace that was destroyed had been repaired. Eureka was sitting in the hall. She was wearing a light red robe and holding a scepter. She listened to the general who was next to her. "Your Majesty, more than a month has passed. The group of thieves has long left. What are we waiting for? General Clinton, don't be impatient. After all, Aisha has awakened the 5th time. It will be too difficult for us to recapture the outer wall with our current strength. Yes, let's wait for a while." Several people tried to persuade him. Yulida looked at Clinton and raised her hand to stop him. "I know what you are worried about, but we can't have any more internal friction in the short term. It doesn't matter if Aisha has 5th awakening or not. Even if it is fake, she should have at least 4th awakening. We can only rely on force to make her surrender. This group of invaders made us lose 2 marshals. We have to recuperate for some time." Clinton sighed. "I'm afraid that they're making progress while we are resting. They're in the dark while we are in the light." Eureka shook her head. "No need to say more." The heavy rain bathed the palace. In the heavy rain outside the palace, 6 figures in raincoats stood in the corner of a building. Their gazes were cold as they stared at the towering palace. After a while, one of them said, "Big brother, with such heavy rain, they probably won't go out today. Brother, this is a good opportunity." The old man stared at the palace for a moment and nodded. "Let's go." "Good." The others immediately followed. There was excitement in their eyes. Half an hour later, everyone appeared outside a plaza 2 districts away from the palace. This plaza was the altar where the palace worshipped the gods. In the center was a towering stone platform with 2 angel statues on it. In the center was a stone statue that was about 10 meters tall. It was an extremely beautiful woman whose age could not be seen. She looked like a young girl in her 20s, but also a mature woman in her 30s. She wore a strange skirt on her lower body. Everyone who lived in King City knew that this was the well-known goddess of war, Sylvia. Chapter 770. 6 people suddenly jumped out and rushed towards a statue in front of the square. A group of ordinary soldiers was stationed in front of the statue. They wore black raincoats and stood in front of the statue like ghosts in the heavy rain. 6 figures crossed through the curtain of rain and instantly arrived in front of the soldiers. They didn't make any sound as they killed the soldiers. After dealing with the guards, the 6 of them quickly rushed up the altar and pushed down the statue. The statue didn't fall to the ground. Instead, it was tilted in the heavy rain by the fat man. The stooped old man looked at the altar below the statue. Just as he thought, there was a deep, pitch-black hole here that led to the underground. He hesitated because of the loss he had suffered in the palace. But he quickly dispelled the concerns and took the lead to rush down. At the moment, the rain was pouring down on the streets. There were no pedestrians. The doors and windows of the buildings near the square were closed to prevent the rain from seeping into the homes. However, in one of the hotel rooms, although the transparent glass window was closed, the curtains were not drawn. A white-haired old man, who looked to be in his 70s, was sitting by the window with a glass of red wine in his hand. He was quietly sipping it, but his eyes were fixed on a rainstorm outside. To be more precise, his eyes were fixed on the statue in the rainstorm. When the statue of God tilted, the old man's thoughts suddenly jolted and he woke up. He was stunned for a while before he suddenly stood up from the chair. His eyes widened as he pushed open the window and stretched his head out to look, completely ignoring the rain pouring in from outside. Soon he saw the fat man holding the statue of God, as well as the hunchbacked old man and the others. Intruders! His pupils shrank, and his heart was filled with horror. He hurriedly lifted his leg, preparing to jump out of the window. However, he suddenly thought of something and quickly retracted his leg. He turned around and ran to the other side of the room. His movements were so fast that he knocked over a bottle of expensive red wine that cost at least 1,000 gold coins. He ran to the front of a small cage, and in this cage was a small, pitch-black mouse. It looked no different from an ordinary mouse, but it was not an ordinary mouse. If one looked closely, they would find that there was a ring-shaped outline inside its ears. This was a sound-seeking mouse. It was also one of the favorite messenger pets of the Dark Believers in the outer wall. The old man tore the cage and took out the sound-seeking mouse. He took out a small wooden tube from the bottom of a pen holder and hung it in front of the mouse's chest. He patted the mouse's hair and said anxiously, "Go." Once the sound-seeking mouse regained its freedom, it quickly ran away. In the blink of an eye, it jumped out of the crack in the door and disappeared. The old man took a deep breath after releasing the sound-seeking mouse. He turned to the window and took out a black cloth that was hanging behind the chair. There was a black sword wrapped inside. The sword wasn't wide. It was curved like a sword. It had a very capable temperament. Holding the saber, he lifted his leg and stepped on the window, leaping down from the hotel that was more than 10 stories high. 4 or 5 floors below, a couple was making out by the window. They didn't close the curtains. When the man was about to kiss his girlfriend who had her eyes closed, he suddenly saw a figure falling from the window behind her. He immediately screamed in shock. "Second brother, someone is coming." The graceful woman was about to jump into the deep hole under the statue. Suddenly, her eyes moved. She turned to look at the back of the square. There, a black shadow was rapidly approaching. His body exuded an amazing heat. It was not inferior to them. She narrowed her eyes and said, "I didn't expect that there would be a hidden master here. I didn't find it before. Third sister, leave it to me. You defend." The burly man's eyes were full of murderous intent. He pulled out the sword and rushed out. The rainwater surged on the back of the sword. "I'm going too." The sixth brother, whose cheeks had been destroyed, said as he quickly rushed over. He was worried that the battle would fall into a stalemate with his fourth brother alone and cause too much of a commotion. In the blink of an eye, both of them met the old man. The black sword in the old man's hand melted as it rushed out. The old man entered the demonic body state. His whole body was like a humanoid lizard, but his body was like an insect. There was a network of muscle lines. It looked extremely strange. Seeing this strange demonic body, the burly man recognized it at a glance. He growled, "It's their legendary monster, Shadow Hunter. Kill." Old Six made up his mind. Without another word, he entered the demonic body and rushed over. Fighting one against two, the old man fell into a disadvantageous position in the blink of an eye. In fact, just dealing with one person made him feel strenuous. After all, although his magic mark was legendary, the biggest strength of a shadow hunter was to lurk and assassinate, not to fight head-on. It was just that the current situation made him unable to lurk and assassinate. He could only jump out to pin them down, hoping to delay the arrival of the reinforcements. Go to hell. The old man's claws were like knives. His originally kind and ordinary face was filled with ferocity. He roared and rushed toward the weaker old Six. The heavy rain washed down like the sea, covering the figures of the three people. In the palace, Yulida was having a meeting with a group of generals and counts. Although the things they were discussing were of no value to her, she had to find a topic to keep these people here. After all, to the forces like the Witcher clan and the Demonic Creature Research Institute, the loss of the god's corpse was a devastating blow. They should not remain calm. The pace of the meeting was very slow. The heavy rain outside made the generals and counts unwilling to end the meeting so early. After all, going out in a rainstorm, even if there was a carriage to pick them up, it was easy to dirty their boots. In this quiet meeting, no one knew how long it had been. Suddenly, a female officer trotted in from the side hall, bypassed the generals in the meeting room, and came in front of Yulida. She turned sideways and handed her a small note. Seeing the anxious expression on her face, Yulida's heart sank slightly, but on the surface, she maintained a calm expression. She glanced at the generals in the room. Some of the generals and counts who were looking at her saw her gaze and immediately looked away as if nothing had happened. They continued to chat with the people beside them, but their eyes would inadvertently sweep over Yulida. Yulida's fingers were very dexterous. She quickly rolled up the note into a ball. When she saw the few words on the note, her eyes widened and she suddenly stood up from her chair. Her face was full of shock and disbelief. This huge commotion immediately caused the whispers in the conference room to stop. Everyone looked at her in shock. Yulida, on the other hand, felt a little lack of oxygen in her brain and a wave of dizziness. After a while, she recovered and immediately shouted, "Immediately gather everyone and head to the altar. The intruders have returned. They want to steal the god's remains under the statue of Sylvia." "What? How is this possible? Isn't the god's remains already?" The generals and counts present were dumbfounded. They were so shocked that they didn't know what to do. However, Yulida didn't have the time to explain anything to them. She took the lead and rushed out of the palace. Chapter 771. When Yulida arrived at the square, she saw that the towering statue of God had collapsed on the square. The perfect face on the statue was plastered on the muddy water, allowing the dirty rainwater to wash it away. On the altar where the statue had stood, there was a huge hole. She was stunned for a second before she rushed to the altar. She saw that the hole under the altar had been destroyed by someone. There were dents on the periphery of the hole made by swords. She quickly jumped into the hole. Below the hole was a secret chamber made of granite. The area of the secret chamber was not large, and there were no extra items on display. At this moment, it was empty. The last trace of hope in her heart was instantly extinguished. She stood in the secret chamber blankly, as if she had lost her soul. Her eyes were dull. After a long, long time, she slowly came back to her senses. The corner of her mouth moved slightly. She turned around and silently crawled out of the secret chamber. At this time, she saw the rest of the counts and generals rushing over. However, among them, there were a few noble counts who came in carriages. They were also wearing raincoats, and there were servants holding umbrellas beside them for fear of being splashed by the rain. When she saw the appearance of these people, a bitter smile appeared on her beautiful face. "Your Highness, your Highness!" One of the generals, who was completely soaked, hurriedly ran over. He opened the umbrella in his hand and covered Yulida's head. He said with concern, "Your Highness, are you all right? What did you mean when you said that the sacred remains have been stolen? Did the group of invaders come here?" As he spoke, he glanced around. When he saw the hole under the altar, his expression changed slightly. He seemed to have thought of something. At this time, the other generals and counts also gathered around. "Your Highness, didn't the group of invaders leave? They're still here? My God, this is too dangerous. Don't they intend to leave?" The earls looked around nervously, fearing that the invaders would suddenly appear. They had heard the inside story of the Pagel Mountains and knew how terrifying this group of invaders was. It was not the case of complete victory and expulsion of the invaders that had been spread by the commoners. Facing the almost interrogative tone of the earls, Yulida indifferently lowered her head. She looked extremely embarrassed at the moment. Her hair was messy and wet from the rain, draping over her cheeks. After a moment of silence, she suddenly thought of something. Her nose gently sniffed, and her expression immediately changed. She quickly pushed through the crowd and rushed into the curtain of rain. Soon, he arrived at the building at the outer edge of the square. There was an alley here, and at the entrance of the alley, there was an old man lying face down. His hair was white, and he was lying face down on the ground. The rainwater under his body was dyed red, and his blood flowed along with the rain into the surrounding sewers. Eureda's face was pale, and she hurriedly went forward to pick him up, only to find that he had already stopped breathing. His wrinkled face was frighteningly pale, and there was a huge hole in his chest. His heart was missing, and there were a few claw marks on his throat. One of his arms was broken, and his abdomen was torn open, with his intestines hanging below his hip bone. He had died a horrible death, and it was not hard to imagine what kind of terrifying battle he had gone through. "Uncle Mick," Yulida hissed in grief. She hugged him and burst into tears. Tears and rainwater mixed together and slid down her face. It was as if the heavens were pitying her. However, she felt that the cold rain was so heartless. After the grief and indignation, only hatred was left in her heart. She slowly returned to the square with the old man's body in her arms. A group of generals and earls came to greet her, looking at her with concern. Some of them noticed the old man in her arms, but they were puzzled. "Your Highness, who is this man? He is the intruder?" Everyone looked puzzled. Yulida remained silent. When she heard someone say that he was the intruder, her expression changed a little. She raised her head and expressionlessly said, "He is the person that my father trusted the most. He has been living here, pretending to be an ordinary lonely old man and guarding the immortal's corpse. The last time the god's coffin was stolen by the intruder, it was just a smokescreen. The immortal's corpse was not inside, but this time, the immortal's corpse is really gone." Hearing her words, everyone looked at each other and saw the shock in each other's eyes. "Your Highness, what you said, is it true?" A general could not help but ask. Yulida looked at him expressionlessly and said, "If we can't get the immortal's corpse back, you will see with your own eyes whether the immortal's corpse is lost or not after a while." The general's expression changed, and he could not help but shiver. "Your Highness, the immortal's corpse is so important. How can it be hidden in a place like the altar? Isn't this nonsense?" A earl in his 50s with white hair on his temples reprimanded in shock and anger. Yulida raised her eyelids and glanced at him. She said, "This was arranged by my father. If you have any objections, you can wait for my father to come back and talk to him. Besides, even if it was arranged under the palace, wasn't it still robbed? Is the defense there weak? The Earl's expression changed slightly, and he was speechless. Your Highness, other than you, who else knows that the immortal's corpse is hidden here? How did these invaders know about it? Yes, we have been here for so many years, but we did not know that the immortal's corpse was hidden here. How did these intruders find it? There must be a traitor. Hearing their words, Yulida felt a sense of irritation in her heart. One could even say that she was manic. However, she had strong self-control. Her fingers slightly tightened, and she took a deep breath. She said coldly, "Other than me, my father, and Uncle Mick, no one else knows about this. After the fake coffin under the palace was robbed, I never came here. I was worried that they would follow me and track me here, but they still found this place. How is this possible? Could it be that Mick leaked the secret? He died in battle. How could he leak the secret? Let's not talk about the strangeness of this matter for now. Right now, retrieving the immortal's corpse is our top priority. Since it has already been robbed, what's the point of thinking so much? If these intruders return to their territory, we will be completely finished. That's right. Let's think about how to retrieve the immortal's corpse first." Yulida acted as if she did not hear the crowd's discussion. Her gaze slowly shifted to a spot outside the plaza. If one looked closely, there was a faint smell of blood on this path. Although it was covered by the rain, and the smell was extremely faint, it should be the direction that the intruders left in. After a moment of silence, she said, "Inform Dragon Mother, Rock Demon, and King Ea the Hunter family. Tell them about this, and ask them to lead their pioneers to stop the invaders. I'll go ahead and see if I can follow them. I'll leave my scent along the way so that they can follow my scent." "Your Highness, you want to go personally? How can you do that? There are Dominator experts among them." "Your Highness, you should stay here and take charge of the situation," several generals and earls hurriedly advised. Chapter 772. On the giant wall in the heavy rain, 6 figures leaped up and stood on the wide walkway. The burly man and the fat man gently placed a 7 to 8 meter long, oval-shaped metal ball on the ground. The metal ball looked like a mango, flat and round. There were many solidified gray shells on its surface. Under the washing of the rain, pieces of bright silver metal could be seen. There were streamlined metal patterns on the surface of the metal, and it looked very simple. "Big brother, let's inspect the goods," the graceful woman said to the old man. The old man looked around. "The rain is too heavy here. The corpses of the gods will be polluted if we open the coffin. Let's find a clean place first. Then let's go to the outer wall and find a place to settle down. I don't think they will come here. Even if they come, we won't be afraid, as long as we have the corpses of the gods in our hands." All right. They quickly made a decision. They moved the coffin and went along the wall. After a while, they arrived at a village on the outskirts of the outer wall. They sneaked into a farmer's house. The torrential rain poured down and lightning flashed, illuminating the world occasionally. In the spacious living room, the farmer and his wife were lying on the floor, their necks bent at a 90-degree angle. Their 2 daughters, who were studying medicine in the bedroom, were also lying on the table and the floor. Blood flowed from the corners of their mouths. Their necks were also broken, and it was done by the same person. Only the old man and the others were left in the house. They moved the oval metal ball into the farmer's cowshed. The cowshed was large enough to hold the huge metal ball. The cows inside were all killed and piled up in a corner of the cowshed. The 6 of them surrounded the metal ball. The hunchbacked old man reached out to wipe away the dirt on the surface of the metal ball. Soon, he found a gap thinner than a strand of hair on the edge of the metal ball. In addition, there was a raised metal plate in the middle of the gap. The old man frowned. The shape of the coffin was completely different from the fake one they had seized. It didn't look like a coffin at all. The surface of the coffin didn't have the engravings of the goddess of war and the monsters. It was too ordinary and low-key. "Big brother, how do we open this thing? Is it locked?" The burly man and Fatty looked at the strange shape of this thing and didn't know where to start. The stooped old man pondered for a moment and tried to move his palm against the metal plate. However, the metal plate was firmly fixed. Just as he was about to withdraw his hand, the metal ball suddenly trembled, scaring the few of them. After all, they had been injured by the poisonous gas released by the fake last time. They had suffered quite a bit, and it had left a lot of trauma. Just as the hunchbacked old man retracted his palm, a pleasant female voice came from behind the metal plate. The female voice spoke in a language that the six of them had never heard before. When they heard this female voice, the six of them retreated in fear, their faces filled with horror. The hunchbacked elder was also shocked. He stared at the metal ball in shock. This voice, could it be the goddess of battles inside? Was she not dead? The fatty, the graceful woman, and the others had the same thought. They looked at each other and saw the disbelief in each other's eyes. Remember that the goddess of battles was 300 years old. How could she still be alive? Also, if she was alive, how could she let them kill their way into the wall? The sweet-sounding female voice repeated the strange language from before. Then, with two beeps, the metal plate lit up with a red light, and then the voice went silent. The hunchbacked old man waited for more than 10 minutes. Only when the voice stopped did he heave a sigh of relief. However, he discovered that his back was drenched in sweat. He turned to look at the graceful woman and asked, "Is there a living creature inside?" The graceful woman shook her head. When the female voice appeared, she used her ability to sense it. There is no sign of life. Big brother, didn't the wall lord say that the goddess of battles died a long time ago? The sixth brother, whose face was ruined, said in a shaky voice. The hunchbacked elder stared at the coffin for a moment and said in a low voice, "Step back a bit." The others heard this and immediately moved back a bit. The hunchbacked elder carefully raised his hand and patted the metal ball a few times, but there was no response. He was a little relieved and said, "It seems that this should be something similar to the phonograph of the wall master. It left her previous voice here. It is not her who spoke." The others heaved a sigh of relief. If this Valkyrie was still alive, she would probably be able to kill them easily with a lift of her finger. How could she allow them to fool around like this? The hunchbacked elder carefully examined the ball. After a moment of consideration, he took out his sword and used it to cut the small gap on the edge of the metal ball. After several failed attempts, the blade finally cut into the gap. He immediately used his strength to pry it up. Crack! The metal ball made a cracking sound and slightly loosened up. The hunchbacked elder adjusted the blade and used the same method to pry it open in other places. 10 minutes later, the small gap on the outside of the metal ball became half a centimeter wide. The hunchbacked elder melted the sword and entered the demon form. He told the others to step back and then used his demon claw to grab the edge of the metal ball and lifted it up. A gust of cold air came out of the metal ball. The cold air was exactly the same as the fake divine coffin. The hunchbacked elder's pupil shrank as he hurriedly stepped back. Soon, the cold air spread out and gradually spread. The surrounding temperature dropped sharply. Even the heavy rain that fell on the cowshed suddenly became lighter. Because the cold air was absorbed by the top of the cowshed, it condensed into a thick layer of ice crystals. If the 6 people were standing outside the cowshed, they would notice that the rainwater that fell on the cowshed was frozen into ice as soon as it splashed. The temperature in the cowshed quickly dropped below zero. The spread of the cold air became wider and wider, and the rainwater flowing down the edge of the cowshed turned into icicles. The entire cowshed was soon frozen into an ice room, including the dead cows piled up in the corner. All of their bodies stiffened, and the blood that flowed out froze into ice. After a while, when the cold air almost dissipated, the hunchbacked elder tentatively reached out his hand to touch a little bit of the cold air. He only felt that his fingertips were cold, but other than that, he didn't feel any discomfort. He tried again and finally came to the conclusion that the cold air was different from the last time. It wasn't poisonous, but pure cold air. After knowing that the cold air was not poisonous, he immediately rushed into the cowshed. However, just in case, he still held his breath and looked into the oval metal sphere. He saw a faint white gas drifting inside, and in the haze, a perfectly proportioned snow-white naked body was lying inside, as if it was in a deep sleep. When he saw the face of the body, he heaved a sigh of relief. This appearance matched the information he received for the mission. This was Goddess Sylvia. His gaze landed on her body. She was completely naked, with nothing covering her body, including the private parts of her lower body. However, there was not a hint of lust in his eyes. Instead, the more he looked, the more frightened he became. There was no sign of life in this Goddess Sylvia's body. She was undoubtedly a dead person. However, her corpse's skin was more lustrous and tender than a living person's. Logically speaking, after more than 300 years, even if it wasn't rotten, it would at least be a dried corpse. However, Sylvia's corpse was like a living person in a deep sleep. There wasn't a single wrinkle on her skin. This could be explained by the cold air. But there was another point that made him feel incredulous. That was, Sylvia's lower body from the waist down wasn't made up of human legs. Instead, it was a lump of disgusting, grotesque limbs. It was a stark contrast to her perfect upper body. Her upper body was like a god's, but her lower body was like a devil from hell. He stared at her in a daze. Because he was entranced, he stared for a long time. Suddenly, he seemed to see the god's corpse open her eyes. It was a pair of extremely deep and resplendent eyes that seemed to contain the endless starry sky. They were high above, filled with holiness, and yet emotionless, looking down at him. Compared to her cold gaze, her cheeks seemed to reveal a smile. The corners of her mouth curled up slightly. Just this slight expression alone made her extremely dazzling. She was filled with irresistible charm and extremely feminine charm. The group of disgusting, grotesque limbs under her body also seemed to be wriggling slightly, trying to climb out of the metal ball. No! The hunchbacked elder roared and took a few steps back. Everything in front of him suddenly disappeared like an illusion. Everything returned to what he saw before. Sylvia was still lying quietly in the metal ball. Her eyes were closed as if she was in a deep sleep. The horrifying limbs on her lower body also maintained their previous posture and didn't change at all. However, the fantasy-like scene from before lingered in his mind for a long time. His face was pale, and he gasped for breath. He had an urge to immediately escape from this place. Big brother. What's wrong, big brother? The fatty, the graceful woman, and the others heard the sound and rushed in. When they saw the hunchbacked elder's appearance, they were shocked. They saw that he seemed to have experienced an intense battle. In this extremely cold cowshed, he was sweating profusely and gasping for breath. I'm fine. The hunchbacked elder took a deep breath and slowly calmed his violently beating heart. He still felt palpitations in his heart. He didn't dare to look at the body that was a combination of holiness and evil. He felt that it took a great deal of courage to even stay beside this thing. However, he could be sure that this corpse wasn't fake. It was a genuine god's corpse. This is the war god clan? The structure of her body. How could it be the graceful woman and the others also noticed Sylvia in the metal ball? When they saw the horrifying structure of her lower body, their expressions instantly changed. The hunchbacked elder took a deep breath and said, "Don't stare too much. This thing is a little evil. No wonder it could suppress the god wall, even after death." Ah! The burly man screamed and stepped back a few steps. His legs were trembling and his forehead was full of sweat. His eyes were full of horror. When the hunchbacked old man saw him like this, he knew that he had probably seen the same horrifying fantasy as himself. He stepped forward and pushed the other half of the metal sphere up, covering it. When the sphere covered Sylvia's beautiful face, he seemed to see her eyes open. His heart trembled, and he didn't dare to think too much. He quickly fastened the metal sphere tightly, and in his heart, he even regretted opening this thing. Now that we have a god's corpse, what should we do next? According to the previous plan, the hunchbacked elder gritted his teeth. Eureka quickly climbed the giant wall. She looked at the muddy water left on the wall. She knew that the previous invaders had been here. She looked around, but didn't see any footprints or traces. As for the smell, it had long been washed away by the heavy rain. She wasn't good at tracking smell. Have escaped from a giant wall. She looked at the vast hunting area in front of her. She could vaguely see some huge monsters crawling in the rain. Her face turned ugly as she clenched her teeth. After a moment, several figures swept over. They were generals. All of them had the strength of pioneers. "Your Majesty, have you found them?" Eureka shook her head. The anger in her eyes had long calmed down. She was silent for a moment. "Immediately gather people and prepare for a comprehensive search. We must find them before they enter the abyss." The generals looked at each other and immediately complied. What a big rain! Dean stood by the window, looking at the cloudy sky. Occasionally he could hear a few thunders, like the angry roar of the gods. Such a big rain, it should be able to cover the entire range of the giant wall. "Master." Noise came out of the temple and called out. Dean looked at him. "Come in." Noise crossed the threshold and quickly walked into the temple. "The king of the inner wall has sent a letter to summon you and Her Highness Aisha." Dudian was startled. His eyes lit up. "I know." Noise hesitated for a moment before whispering, "Young master, will they deliberately summon you to deal with you?" "I don't know." Dean shook his head and looked at the sky. "I hope they won't be so stupid." Dean took some battle items with him and left the temple. He went to the inner wall alone. Even if he couldn't beat the master of the inner Baron level, he could escape back to the outer wall. After all, the journey wasn't far unless they set up a trap. But even if Aisha went with him, it wouldn't be of any help. Dean arrived at the inner wall after a moment. He did not go straight to the palace, but observed from the periphery for a while. He saw that there were many figures with strong heat energy gathered inside. Among them, there were 4 inner Baron level heat energy figures, and he knew all 4 of them. He had seen them during the battle at the Pagel Mountains. They were from the 3 hunter families. Chapter 773. Who are you? Stop. The guard at the bottom of the palace stopped Dean and shouted, "Her Highness Yulida has invited me here. Please inform her." Dean's attitude was humble and polite. The guard looked at him up and down and said, "Please tell me your name." "Dean, you wait here. I'll go inform her." The guard's attitude was not so polite. There was a sense of superiority in his eyes. After a moment, the guard returned. His attitude was obviously much more respectful. His waist was also hunched. "Mr. Dean, please." Thousands of steps made the palace look like a divine palace. It was solemn and dignified. When Dean came to the front of the palace, he saw many extraordinary figures gathered in the hall from the open door. Some of them were people he knew, including 1 or 2 pioneers who served as elders of Dragon Clan. With the strength of pioneers, these 2 elders were fully qualified to sit in the palace. But at this moment they were standing. There were not many chairs in the huge palace. Only 4 or 5 people were sitting. Among them, sitting in front of the dragons, was a graceful and elegant lady in a gorgeous robe. Her eyebrows were faintly similar to Aisha and Hathaway. However, she had a more mature and charming charm than the 2. However, this charming flavor seemed a bit cold under her indifferent expression. It made people unable to raise their thoughts of blasphemy. When Dean came to the door, someone had noticed him and turned to look at him. Yulida was sitting on the throne at the top of the hall. She was holding a scepter and wearing a crown. Her face was dignified at the moment. Her heroic eyebrows gave people an inviolable feeling. Although she was young, her momentum was not weak. She looked down and saw Dean outside the hall. She immediately got up and waved to Dean. Dean calmly stepped into the hall. His eyes swept across the faces of the people sitting in the hall. Most of the people who were looking at him were a bit curious and had bad intentions. Among them, there were obvious hatred in their eyes. Dean knew that they had recognized his identity, but he did not care. "Your Highness, this is?" a black-robed old man from the monastery asked. Dean looked at him and narrowed his eyes. He had seen this person before. He knew the other party, and the other party also knew him. He was the one who had secretly captured him and brought him to the monastery. Dean sneered. "Elder, how long has it been since we last met? Don't you recognize me?" Mo Glang's face darkened, and he said coldly, "When did I know you? It seems that you are old and forgetful." I didn't expect your monastery to be so short of people. You have a forgetful old man fighting in the front line. Dean didn't seem to be afraid of offending people. You. Mo Glang was furious and took a step forward. The burly Dean, who was sitting in the chair in front of him, raised his hand to stop him. Are you the one who used despicable means to take away the outer wall and try to take it for yourself? You really are as arrogant and ignorant as the rumors say. Everyone, suddenly a loud and clear voice echoed out. Don't forget why we are here today. Mr. Dean was invited by me. I can let bygones be bygones as long as Mr. Dean is willing to join us. I hope that everyone will keep in mind that the god's corpse has been stolen. Do you need me to repeat the serious consequences of this matter? Eureka was the one who spoke. Everyone looked at her and then at Dean, but didn't say anything. Mo Glang didn't intend to let Dean go. Your Highness, you let such a person join our team to fight against the invaders. What if he stabs us in the back? This kid is very insidious. He can do anything. I think the Dragon Clan has a deep understanding of this point. Dean squinted at him. Didn't you say that you don't know me? How do you know that I'm insidious? Do you people from the monastery like to slander people? If that's all you have, then I really feel sorry for you and all the civilians. Oh, I forgot. You're an elder of the punishment department. You're only in charge of brainless things like fighting and killing, so it's understandable that you're forgetful. You. Mo Glang was so angry that he couldn't speak. Don't involve the Dragon Clan in whatever you want to do. I'm not familiar with you. The elegant lady who was sitting on the chair looked at Dean. She retracted her gaze and said indifferently. Mo Glang's face changed. If it was just Dean, then it would be okay. But the attitude of the Dragon Clan was different. Did the Dragon Clan reconcile with Dean? Dean looked at the Dragon Mother. He was surprised, but didn't think much about it. In any case, the Dragon Clan's way of dealing with Aisha had disappointed him. It was unforgivable. It was also the first time for Yulida to see Dean. She didn't expect that the person who had stirred up the outer wall would be around the same age as her. She was surprised but also curious. Dean's performance gave her a headache. He liked to stir up trouble. It was hard to appease him. She changed the topic. Today we have gathered here. I hope that everyone can put down the hatred in the past. Now that the enemy is in front of us, we should unite against the common enemy. In any case, the first goal is to recapture the god's corpse. Yes. Dean nodded in agreement. The others who wanted to speak in favor of Eureka didn't speak as they saw Dean seconding the motion. Dean didn't care about their eyes. He looked at Eureka. Your Highness, can you let me sit down and talk? The people who were prejudiced against Dean were angry. Mo Glang sneered. You want to sit down? Do you know who is sitting here? Who are you? You're just a lowly person from the outer wall. It seemed that he realized that his words were too much. Although he thought that it was a bit inappropriate to say it out loud, so he immediately stopped. Dean looked at him, but didn't say anything. He looked up at Eureka. Eureka felt a headache. Dean was really good at stirring up trouble for her. He asked for a seat as soon as he came up. The people who were sitting in the hall were the highest leaders of the various forces. If she let Dean sit, then it was tantamount to looking down on the others. If she didn't, then she was worried that she would anger Dean. After all, the god's corpse had been stolen. With the help of Aisha, who had awakened 5 times, the chances of recapture the god's corpse would greatly increase. She hesitated for a moment and said, All right, sit with Mr. Dean. There was a commotion in the hall. There was some dissatisfaction. Mr. Dean, why didn't Her Highness Aisha come? Eureka immediately pointed out Aisha's name. She wanted to tell the others that Dean was here for her sake. I'll handle this small matter. She's resting at home. Resting? Don't let her rest when she's going to fight. Mo Glang sneered. He didn't miss any opportunity to attack Dean. Dean didn't look at him again as if he didn't hear anything. His disregard made Mo Glang's sneer turn gloomy. Soon, the seats were moved and Dean naturally sat down. Dragon Mother, Abbot, and others were calm. They knew that Yulida valued Aisha behind Dean. That's why she gave him a seat. Therefore, she didn't want to lower herself to Dean's level. Your Majesty, can we discuss business now? The burly man asked. He was the previous patriarch of the Rock family. His nickname was Rock Devil. Eureka nodded. It's been a month since the Pagar Mountains. I thought that the intruders had left after they took the fake coffin. I didn't expect them to lurk here. They should have found that there was no god's corpse in the coffin when they left. So they are waiting for an opportunity. Their plan is very thorough, and they caught us off guard. Now they have stolen the real god's corpse. I saw the traces left by them on the giant wall. I guess they have left the giant wall. But there is still a long way to go from the giant wall to the abyss area. They should take a rest. This is our chance to catch up with them. Your Majesty. The rock demon's eyes were like torches as he said, "Last time, I asked you if the immortal's corpse was real. You said it was. This time, you said it was real. I want to know if it is real or not." Eureka had expected that they would ask such a question. She looked at Rock Devil and said, "This time it is real. I didn't mean to deceive you last time. The fake coffin was my father's idea. He was worried that other people would come and steal the god's corpse. So he hid the real god's corpse under the altar and the fake one under the palace. I believe that all of you know that the immortal's remains are hidden under the palace. It's not hard to find out. But the only people who know that the immortal's remains are under the altar, besides Uncle Mick, who is already dead, are me and my father. The purpose of this is to prevent the intruders from sneaking into the palace. They will learn about the real god's corpse from your mouth. That's why we have strictly blocked the information." The rock devil stared at her for a moment and nodded. "I believe it is true this time. But the last time you lied to us, we can't let it go so easily. I will report to the Wall Master and ask him to give us an explanation. Your Majesty, if you didn't lie to us last time, we would have taken advantage of that man's injury to attack them. They would have been dead by now." "Yes," the middle-aged man with aquiline nose who was sitting next to him said in a cold voice. "If we knew that there was no god's corpse in the coffin, then we could have killed all of them. But the result was good. Not only did the god's corpse recover, but he also took them out of the encirclement. Your Majesty, you have harmed all of us this time." Dean noticed that one of the sleeves of the man was empty. There were several new scars and corroded folds on the face and neck of the man. It was estimated that they were caused by the last battle in the Pagar Mountains. Eureka's face turned ugly. She knew that she couldn't absolve herself from the blame, but she also had her own considerations. The reason why she didn't tell them was because she wanted to keep the information about the real god's corpse a secret. She was worried that there were other invaders lurking in the giant wall. Moreover, at that time, she didn't know that there was a Dominator-level powerhouse among the 6 invaders. After that, Dominator rushed out of the palace. He didn't make a single move, so they mistook him for a master from the inner wilderness. That was why they were caught unprepared and defeated. This matter is over. Now we should think about how to take back the god's corpse. Dragon Mother frowned. Eureka took a deep breath. "I am responsible for this matter, but I ask everyone to think about how to get back the god's corpse. I'm afraid that something big will happen before my father comes back if the god's corpse is taken away by them. The area outside the giant wall is vast. If they have the intention to hide, finding them is like looking for a needle in a haystack. Even if we find them, we can't beat them." The monastery's dean sighed. "We don't know how many Wings families Bat Voice and Magic Marks pioneers are. If they lead a team to search, there might be a chance." Rock Devil glanced at the hook-nosed middle-aged man. "Including me, there are 4 of them." The hook-nosed middle-aged man said calmly. Dean sat on the side and listened to their conversation. He suddenly thought of a possibility. He knew that the intruders wouldn't leave, or they couldn't leave. They must still be lurking around the giant wall. But they weren't in a hurry to make a move. Obviously, they didn't intend to act recklessly like before. Even if they went out to search for these people according to the method discussed by Eureka and the others, it would greatly reduce the defense power inside the giant wall. If they casually destroyed the inside of the giant wall, no one could stop them. They could even ambush outside the giant wall and kill the teams that went out to search for them one by one. Eureka and the others obviously thought of this, but they had to hold on to a glimmer of hope to try and recover. Something big happened before the Wall Lord came back. What could happen without the god's corpse? Dean fell in a thought about Eureka's words. It made him quite curious. Instead, he wanted to see what would happen after the god's corpse was stolen. but he had an intuition that it was better not to happen. Otherwise, it would be very bad. These invaders will definitely kill them one by one. From the looks of it now, if I follow the path they discussed, the chances of them being wiped out are very high. This is a good thing for me, but without them as a shield, the next invaders will be more difficult to deal with. I need time to accumulate more electricity and gunpowder. If I can slow down their killing efficiency. Dean's eyes flashed as he lowered his head to think. Chapter 774. Dean's thoughts were interrupted. He didn't need to look to know that the person who spoke was M.O. Granong. He didn't have a good idea for the time being, so he naturally wouldn't put forward any suggestions. He said in a cold voice, "My idea is that you should shut your mouth. Don't interrupt the meeting if you don't have a brain. You will only delay everyone's time. Do you understand?" He didn't care about Dean's feelings, especially the last rhetorical question. It was very easy to arouse people's rebellious heart. M.O. Granong wanted to make a fool of Dean to retaliate for his previous arrogant attitude. But he didn't expect Dean's temper to be more fiery than he had imagined. It was completely different from the obedient appearance that Dean used to be in front of him. Sure enough, once he gained the upper hand, the heart of a villain would be exposed. But how many gentlemen would be able to endure again and again after gaining the upper hand? M.O. Granong was resentful, but he endured. He had realized that provoking Dean at the moment would only bring disgrace to himself. If he was angry, then it would be tantamount to doing as Dean wished and arouse dissatisfaction from others. At the moment, it would make everyone feel disgusted with Dean's attitude. Sometimes not being angry was more lethal than being angry. There was a trace of surprise in Dean's heart when he saw that M.O. Granong didn't make a sound. But he soon thought of the others' thoughts. He glanced at the dissatisfied eyes of others. He knew that M.O. Granong had succeeded. His face was calm. He no longer wasted his thoughts on this episode. He continued to think about the previous thoughts and fell into contemplation. The best way is to tell them that the invaders haven't left yet, so they can prepare a trap and gather everyone. Then, I'll use Old Seven's life to force them to jump out and fight with them. This will cause more casualties to the invaders, but it'll be difficult to explain this to them. They might even suspect that I'm colluding with the invaders. Now is a sensitive time, and the moment they suspect me, it'll be very disadvantageous for me. People's hearts were complicated. Simple things often couldn't be said in a simple way. Dadian saw that Yulita, Dragon Mother, and others had divided the pursuit team. They had marked the route and map of the pursuit, as well as the main search scope, and so on. The plan was drawn up quickly, and they chose to pursue and search. Dean sighed in his heart. He had to open his mouth. "Everyone, I think we can do one thing before trying to pursue and search." He took the initiative to speak. Many people immediately looked over. Eureka frowned and asked, "What is it?" Time was of the essence. She was annoyed to hear even one more word of nonsense. "As far as I know, these invaders are not temporary mercenaries. The relationship and friendship between them is not a simple cooperative relationship. They can be called as partners." Dean said, "How do you know?" "So what if you know?" Moglen said as he saw Dean take the initiative to jump out. Dean knew that the relationship between the invaders wasn't shallow. He judged it from the way they addressed each other in the temple. He looked at Yulida. They supported each other in life and death situations. They should have a deep friendship with each other. Several of their brothers were killed by you. At the same time, their mission was to take away our goddess Sylvia. Now that the mission has been completed, they can return at any time. But will they really leave? I don't think it's possible for me or anyone else here to do so. Upon hearing this, Yulida was stunned for a moment before her eyes lit up. Dragon Mother pondered for a short while, then loosened her brows and slightly nodded. The middle-aged man with a hooked nose looked at Dadian. The dissatisfaction in his eyes faded. "Indeed, when we were besieging them in the Pagel Mountains, I heard them talking about Big Brother and Third Sister. Their relationship isn't shallow. If it was me, I would have found a safe place to hide the god's corpse and then come back to kill them." "That's right." Eureka nodded, her eyes filled with excitement. She wasn't stupid, and she knew that the possibility of this was very high. It should be known that the enemy had been able to hide here for a month and figure out the location of the immortal's corpse. Most likely, the enemy had also figured out the strength of the experts within the wall. Moreover, they didn't have a sovereign realm master overseeing this place. If the enemy knew about this, there was no reason for them not to come back. If that's the case, it's indeed too risky for us to pursue and capture them recklessly. Instead of that, why don't we think of a way to lure them into attacking us first? Eureka quickly thought of a way to set up an ambush. Dean saw that she didn't need to say anything, so he continued to think about his own things. Moglin didn't say anything as he saw that Dudion's proposal was favored by Eureka and the Witcher family. He didn't even look at Dudion. There was no need to continue to test the attitude of the Dragon Clan and Her Highness towards Dudion. Half an hour later, the meeting ended. The torrential rain outside the hall slowly subsided. "Mr. Dean, you came in a hurry, so your clothes are wet. Be careful when you go back." Eureka took the initiative to send Dean off. She handed him a green, animal skin umbrella. It was very delicate and sturdy. It was as waterproof as tarpaulin. It exuded a faint fragrance. Dean took the umbrella. "Send someone to inform me if there's anything." "I will," Eureka said with a smile. "I hope the plan goes smoothly." Dean said a word of blessing and turned away. Eureka's eyes flashed as she looked at Dean's back. She was under a lot of pressure before, but Dean's reminder made her come up with a plan. She was a bit curious about Dean. If it wasn't for this unusual time, she would have sent people to check the details of Dean. She always felt that it was incredible that such a person could be born in such a barren place like the Outer Wall. "I hope it goes well. Otherwise, I have to take the risk to chase and capture them," she muttered to herself. Dean returned to Utopia Mountain. Now Eureka and the others had made a plan. They were just waiting for the intruders to take the bait. But after a month of lurking and stealing the god's corpse, Dean felt that the intruders were completely different from before. The previous intruders were reckless, but this time they were cautious and thoughtful. He knew that the enemy had put away their contempt and wouldn't easily fall into the trap of Eureka and the others. It seems that the next step is to push. Dean pondered in his heart. However, the invaders did not leave any contact information, so he had no way to find them. Because of this, the invaders dared to delay and only took action after lurking for a month. The first thing they did was to seize the god's corpse instead of killing for Dean. They probably expected that Dean would not be able to contact them, so they did not dare to rashly kill the hostage. It was like a kidnapper who kidnapped someone but couldn't contact the family of the hostage. In this case, the kidnapper wouldn't easily kill the hostage. Dean guessed that most of the intruders were interrupted. Even if he wanted to use this to threaten them, he wouldn't be able to do it. After all, he couldn't find the hostage. Similarly, he didn't dare to kill the hostage. After all, if the hostage died, then the intruders wouldn't be able to kill the hostage for him. In the end, they would have to bear the anger of the intruders. The gains weren't worth the losses. So even though their life was seized, they were still fearless. They lurked for a month and didn't take Dean's transaction seriously. Dean thought for a moment and came up with an idea. He called Noyce and asked him to bring the finger bone of the black-robed teenager. He would gather the military and the nobles loyal to the Holy Church, as well as all the forces of the Dark Church, for an auction. The name of the auction would be the Seventh Brother. Such a name obviously didn't conform to the general rules of the auction. But this event was held by Dean, so everyone listened to him. Even if it didn't conform to the rules, it would be held smoothly. Moreover, it would spread throughout the entire Outer Wall. Dean believed that the intruders would leave at least 1 or 2 people in the Outer Wall to monitor his movements. They would also thoroughly investigate his information as well as the hiding place of the Seventh Brother, even though the Seventh Brother was already dead. Soon, the news of the auction organized by the nobles and the big shots spread to thousands of households. In less than half a day, except for the suburbs and small villages, almost all the residents in the other places knew about it. 3 figures appeared on Crow Mountain less than half a day after the auction started. The leader was a stooped old man who was accompanied by a graceful woman and a burly man. As for the other 3 people, they weren't there. Dean's heart moved. The other three had stayed to guard the god's corpse. It showed that the location of the god's corpse wasn't outside the outer wall. It shouldn't be far from here. It shouldn't be more than half a day's journey. Brat, what did you do to the seventh brother? The burly man took the lead and rushed into the hall. He stared at Dean with anger written all over his face. Duddian calmly said, "Please sit down." The burly man trembled in anger. The stooped old man sat on the chair next to Dean. "I've seen the finger bone of the seventh brother." "What do you mean? Do you want to break the contract?" "It's you who broke the contract," Dean said in a cold voice. "Have you done what I asked you to do after disappearing for a month? Are the masters of the inner wall still alive?" The hunchbacked elder said indifferently, "Killing so many experts isn't an easy task. Furthermore, I don't know if they have a sovereign like me overseeing things. Naturally, I'll have to investigate first. Furthermore, we didn't set a time limit to kill them all. How can that be considered breaking the agreement? But you, I'm wondering whether the seventh brother is dead or alive. You must let us see him." "There's no need to talk about meeting him," Dean said in a cold voice. "If you want to see him, then we will perish together. I'll kill the hostage, and you will wait for the wall's master to come back and clean you up." The stooped old man slightly raised his eyebrows. He didn't expect Dean's reaction to be so intense. He suppressed his anger. "I'll give you 3 more days to kill them all." Dean estimated the time that Eureka and the others would have to bear. In fact, the longer they delay the invaders, the better it would be for him. But he was afraid that Eureka and the others wouldn't be able to wait. Their mentality would explode. 3 days? Isn't it too short? The stooped old man frowned. "At most 3 days." Dean's tone was firm. There was no room for discussion. The stooped old man stared at him and said indifferently, "When this matter is resolved, I hope you can let me see a living seventh brother. Otherwise, time is of the essence. Hurry up." Dean interrupted the old man's threat. The hunchbacked old man snorted coldly and got up to leave. Just as he reached the door, he suddenly thought of something and said without turning his head, "Next time you want to find us, go to a hotel in the West End called Ajam." "What?" "I bought the hotel." "All right." Duddian knew that Eureka's movements in the inner wall would soon reach their ears after the 3 of them left. Once the war breaks out, he would be the fisherman who reaps the benefits. Such a lucky thing was planned by him. If there was a slight mistake in the process, then he would die. But now things were in his control. The next thing to consider was whether the masters of the inner wall could resist the attack of the dominator level. "Master, what should we do next?" "Let's sleep and rest," Dean said. After several consecutive days of work, he was already very tired. Before the upcoming battle, he had to adjust his condition. 2 days later, on a cloudy afternoon, a loud sound exploded in the capital of the inner wall. All the residents in Royal City heard this deafening sound. It was like an earthquake. When the explosion occurred, countless troops seemed to be on standby. They surged out from all the streets, like rivers flowing into the sea, and rushed to the same place. The residents of the city were scared as they didn't know what was going on. Dean, who was in the outer wall, got the news that there were 2 changes in the city. The first one was a secret report from his intelligence network, and the second one was a request for reinforcements from the royal family. He immediately put on his armor and called Noise. "The battle has begun. Prepare according to what I said before." "I know, Master." Noise's expression was solemn. He knew that this was the battle that would determine the fate of the city. Dean rushed to the inner wall alone after he finished his task. A few hours later, when he flew outside Royal City, he immediately saw a large number of soldiers gathered on the streets of the city from afar. The residents had all been sent back to their respective houses, and in the sky above the city center, a few figures were fighting fiercely like sparrows. "They are in a deadlock." Dean was surprised and happy to see this scene. The time difference between the intelligence and the time he rushed over was enough to determine the outcome of the battle. But he didn't expect that when he arrived, the battle was still going on. It was not a one-sided situation like he had imagined. Chapter 775. A few minutes later, Dean came to the central area of King's City. He stopped on the roof of a building. He saw a few ferocious figures fighting in the air. One of them was obviously a bat. His demonized body had a pair of huge bat-like wings. There were white spiral patterns on his body. He looked like a highly poisonous snake. The other one had short wings and a body like a mouse. His head was long and pointed. His whole body was covered with shiny black hair. He couldn't see his facial features. Obviously, one of them was a member of the winged demon clan, and the other one was an invader. On the other side of the sky, the two were fighting fiercely. The heat was like the sun hanging in the sky. It was incomparably dazzling. Their demonized bodies were even more terrifying. One of the demonized bodies was a dragon. Dean recognized that it was a female. It should be the mother of the dragon clan's patriarch, Dragon Mother. Her body was more ferocious and huge than Aisha's. Her dragon wings covered the sky. Her whole body was covered with black and red scales. Her body looked like it was burning with flames. From time to time, she would spit out flames. The scene looked very bizarre and detached from reality. However, Dean had come into contact with some monsters that could spit fire and acid. Some mutated creatures could produce high concentrations of fat or phosphorus in their bodies. They could bring fire, corrosion, and other abilities. For these creatures, spitting fire was as simple as spitting saliva for humans. The one fighting against Dragon Mother was a winged lizard-like monster. It looked a bit like a Western dragon from the old era. It wasn't much different from Dragon Mother's dragon form. However, the color of the scales and the shape of the wings were different. Moreover, the monster's abdomen was high and bulging. Moreover, its head was almost completely demonized. At first glance, it was clearly the head of a monster. There wasn't the slightest human characteristics. Only the skin around the ears and eyes revealed a little human skin color. It's hard to tell who's better. Dean recognized that the lizard-like monster's face contour was similar to that of a stooped old man. He felt incredible when he saw that Dragon Mother didn't fall into a disadvantageous position. Could it be that Dragon Mother had been hiding her strength? In fact, she had already reached the Dominator level. No wonder the battle could last for so long. Dean's mood was complex. He turned to look at the battle on the ground. He saw that the buildings were destroyed. The ground was dripping with blood. There were corpses everywhere. Soldiers and civilians were screaming as they were dying. The three intruders formed a golden triangle pattern to resist the attacks from all sides. Not far from them, there was a body lying on the ground. It was a young man with a destroyed cheek. Dean knew that he was one of the invaders. He looked at the other five. One of them had been sacrificed. However, there were a lot of corpses on the ground, but there was only one intruder. The rest were left by the pioneers and ordinary soldiers of the inner wall. Among these corpses, the most eye-catching were two extremely huge monster corpses. One was a huge python that was tens of meters long. Its whole body was covered with pitch-black scales. In addition to the abdomen, the sides and back were full of sharp thorns. The soft abdomen of a normal snake was covered with hardened scales, which were extremely tough. Dean recognized that it wasn't a monster that was given a name, but an extremely terrifying monster called Titan Viper. The thorns on its body were filled with venom. Being pricked was no less than being bitten. Looking at its body size, it was at least level 90. It was comparable to the masters of the inner desolate level. If it was a legendary monster with a level of 90, then its combat power would be even more terrifying. It was several times stronger than a non-named monster. The other monster looked like a giant ape, but there were several 10-meter-long bone spikes protruding from its back. At this moment, it was lying on the ground, a large pool of blood under its body. It was also a non-named monster, but its level was over 100, and its combat strength was terrifying. Dean knew that it should be a monster that had been tamed by the Monster Research Institute. It was impossible for the intruder to bring such a huge monster to the central area of King's City. However, the two monsters were dead. Only one intruder was sacrificed. It showed that Dragon Mother didn't use her full strength. It was likely that the one who killed the monster was the master of the intruder. Dragon Mother didn't show any strength to contend against the master when the coffin was taken away. Either she knew that the coffin was fake, or she didn't have the ability to display such strength at that time. I really can't underestimate these monster families. Dean's eyes flashed. He surveyed his surroundings. Among the corpses on the ground, he quickly found the rock demon from the meeting in the royal palace. This previous chief of the rock tribe was already dead. His chest had been pierced through, and no one had the time to retrieve his corpse. Without the rock demon, there were no inner desolate level masters in the rock family. Dean frowned. The rock demon was a master of the same generation as Dragon Mother. Now it seemed that the rock demon was much weaker than Dragon Mother. At this time, Dean heard a shout. He turned around and saw the only daughter of the Wall Lord, Princess Yulida, was commanding the army and pioneers to attack the three intruders on the ground. She looked anxious. It seemed that she wanted to get rid of the three intruders so that she could support Dragon Mother and Wing family in the sky. However, among the three intruders, the fat one was like a human-shaped monster. Not only did he have a powerful attack force, but he also had extraordinary endurance. No matter how the surrounding pioneers attacked him, he would always rush up to block them at the first moment. It seemed that these pioneers had suffered losses before. They didn't dare to be knocked down by him. The encirclement was in a stalemate. It seems that we can't be united in the face of a disaster. Seeing this, Dean showed a trace of indifference in his eyes. It was easy for an outsider to see that these pioneers who were encircling the intruders didn't have the murderous spirit to face death. If they rushed forward fearlessly, the three intruders wouldn't be able to resist, no matter how strong they were. After all, they were outnumbered. Moreover, there were two marshals from the military and three inner desolate level masters from the monastery. There was no reason that they couldn't kill the three intruders. However, judging from the way they fought, it was a bit like dragonflies skimming the water. They didn't dare to confront them head-on. Among them, the most courageous ones were the pioneers in the armor of the military. They obeyed Yulida's orders completely. On the other hand, the pioneers of the three families of witches and the monastery seemed to be a bit dispirited. When Dean was observing the details of the surroundings, a whistling sound came from the sky. Bang! Dean saw a black shadow falling diagonally and smashing on the ground, destroying a broken building. In the dust, the black shadow rushed out again. It was Dragon Mother. Chapter 776. Dean's eyelids twitched. He was ready to retreat at any time. The reason why he dared to come close to watch the battle was that the battle would last for several hours. Most of the time, it would be a stalemate, and both sides wouldn't have time to take care of him. But at the moment Dragon Mother was suppressed, it seemed that she was going to lose. If the battle ended in a short period of time, then it would be dangerous for him to stay here. Dragon Mother. Yurida's face changed as she saw Dragon Mother being shot down. She knew that the key to the outcome of the battle was Dragon Mother. She would lose if she lost. The hunchbacked old man swooped down into the cloud of dust. Boom! Boom! The ground shook violently. At the same time, a figure wrapped in dust flew out at an extremely high speed, passing through 7 to 8 buildings. The solid buildings were easily penetrated like pieces of foam paper. Half of a demonic dragon's wings stretched out from the broken building, trembling as it slowly climbed up. It was Dragon Mother. Her wings flapped, and the gravel and dust on her body were blown away. Dean noticed that the faint red light emitted from her scales had weakened. It seemed that only dark scales were left. Moreover, the heat in her body seemed to continue to decline. It had fallen to a level slightly higher than other inner Baron-level powerhouses. Dean's eyes lit up. It seemed that Dragon Mother had used a secret method to temporarily increase her strength. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that a secret method that could temporarily increase one's strength was a treasure. It seemed that if his plan went smoothly and he controlled the inner wall, he would have to thoroughly investigate the secret methods of the dragon family. Although he would have to pay a high price for such a secret method, but it could turn defeat into victory at the critical moment. At this moment, the hunchbacked old man approached Dragon Mother at an incredible speed, not giving her any chance to catch her breath. Dragon Mother retreated step by step, and the battle soon turned into a one-sided suppression. The hunchbacked old man seemed to be full of energy. The longer he fought, the braver he became, while the weaker Dragon Mother became. More and more wounds appeared on her body. After a few minutes, the old man's claws reached out and grabbed Dragon Mother's wings. He twisted and broke them. Dragon Mother frowned in pain. She held the dragon sword in her hands and stabbed towards the old man. Her moves were exquisite. However, the old man's movements were fast. He released the broken wings and used his claws to hit her wrists. He bypassed the sword and cut her palms. The sword in one of her hands fell to the ground. Dragon Mother took the opportunity to retreat. However, the old man closed in on her. Dean had a strange feeling in his heart when he saw Dragon Mother couldn't turn back. He felt relieved, but also pitiful, and sighed. He didn't know why these feelings appeared. Perhaps it was because of her struggling look. It was easy to sympathize with her. After all, human beings were contradictory creatures. It seemed to be an instinct to sympathize with the weak. However, this instinct would eventually be replaced by reason. Seeing that Dragon Mother was in danger, the other pioneers on the land became anxious at once. They attacked Fatty and the graceful woman more fiercely and impatiently. However, impatience inevitably led to carelessness. Although Fatty and the other two experienced a great increase of pressure, the pioneers who attacked fiercely were killed one after another. Eureka's face turned ugly. She jumped down from the tower. Black liquid gushed out of her body and entered the demonic body. She also joined the battle. Dean noticed the battlefield from the corner of his eyes. When he saw Eureka's demonic body, his eyes narrowed. Eureka's demonic body was a bit eye-catching. It was not hideous or ugly. On the contrary, it was extremely simplified. Most of her body was still in the shape of a human. She had white skin and long legs, but her hands and feet had turned into sharp claws. A serpent-like tail grew out of the armor on her buttocks. A pair of hairy ears grew out of her hair. In addition, her abdomen and thighs were not demonic. They were still in the shape of a human. However, she was extremely fast. In a blink of an eye, she was in front of Fatty and the others. From the heat source, Dean could see that the heat fluctuation in her body was maintained at the peak of the pioneer level in the outer wasteland. However, every time she attacked, the heat burst out like an explosion, instantly reaching the inner wasteland level. It could be seen that she had an extremely precise control over her power. This fighting ability was not inferior to the commander of the military, maybe even stronger. Moreover, her demonic body was not completely demonic. Generally speaking, the more the demonic body was covered, the higher the degree of demonic transformation and the stronger the power. The demonic transformation of an inner wasteland level powerhouse was more than 80% of the body. Except for the head, all the parts were demonic. As for the ruler, like the stooped old man, even half of his head was demonic. Unless he deliberately controlled the degree of demonic transformation, it would be the same. Since Eureka was participating in the battle, she naturally attacked with all her strength. However, even with all her strength, her body only had such a small amount of demonic transformation. It was really strange. The strangest thing was that Dean had never seen such a shape of demonic transformation. Among the high-level magic marks that he knew, there seemed to be no such shape. With the addition of Eureka, the pressure on Fatty and the other two increased sharply. Soon, the graceful woman, who had the weakest combat power, had her arm injured by Eureka's claws. The other pioneers found a gap and concentrated their attacks on the graceful woman. The stable golden triangle of the three quickly revealed a flaw. It was only a matter of time before it was broken. Dean was secretly awestruck when he saw Eureka's agile and flickering body. He knew from the intelligence that Eureka was not very old, even 2 years younger than him. However, the power she showed at this moment was much stronger than him. It was estimated that she could compete with Hai Sha. However, it was not surprising. Her father was the Wall Lord, so he had all the resources. Dean suspected that her magic marks were not from the monsters near the giant wall, but from other places, even from the kingdom of God. It was estimated that it was also a legendary magic mark, or even a higher-level magic mark. Just as Eureka led the pioneers of all forces to attack, the situation on the other side suddenly changed dramatically. Most of Dean's attention was still on Dragon Mother's battle. She was unable to resist the attack of the stooped old man. She was forced into the battle circle, and the injuries on her body were increasing. Just when Dean thought that the battle would end in 5 minutes, Dragon Mother suddenly burst out an amazing aura and forced the stooped old man to retreat. The stooped old man didn't seem to expect that she still had such a strong power. After being repelled, he coughed up a mouthful of blood and looked at her in shock. Chapter 777. The heat on Dragon Mother's body was fading at an amazing speed. At the same time, the pitch-black scales outside her body gradually turned into white crystals, emitting a white mist. The transformation happened very fast. From her chest, as the center, the mist spread to every corner of her body. Within a blink of an eye, even the enormous dragon wings on her back had turned into a pair of crystal wings that looked like 2 ice sculptures. Ice crystal. Dean was shocked. It looked like his frozen right arm. Did Dragon Mother also have ice blood disease? Moreover, she seemed to be able to control her body to transform into ice crystals. The stooped old man roared angrily when he saw Dragon Mother's transformation. He suddenly raised his speed, trying to interrupt her transformation. However, Dragon Mother's body had been mostly crystallized by now, and the heat inside her had dropped to the freezing point. She looked like a dying person. She let out a sonorous phoenix cry and lunged at the old man. Her demonized ice crystal dragon claw tore out forcefully, even leaving cracks in the air. White mist coiled around her body as the dragon claw struck on the old man's sharp claw. In the next moment, the old man retracted his claw as fast as a bolt of lightning. His claw was wrapped in a frosty mist, showing signs of being frozen. The stooped old man's face darkened. He immediately retreated. Dragon Mother took advantage of the victory and chased after him. She forced the old man to retreat step by step. The old man didn't dare to fight back, so he could only hide. Dean's eyelids twitched. He didn't expect that the situation would be reversed in an instant. Dragon Mother's power could even force a dominator to retreat. During the chase, the area of Dragon Mother's body grew larger and larger. Soon, her entire body was covered in ice, making her look like a goddess of war carved from ice and snow. Meanwhile, the heat released from her body had completely disappeared. Even when she launched fierce attacks, she didn't release any heat at all. Dean watched the two of them chase as fast as lightning. Their roles were switched in the blink of an eye. He was surprised. Was there such a hidden power in the ice blood disease? How did she control it? After his right arm was crystallized, no matter how hard he tried to control it, his right arm was always crystallized and couldn't return to normal human skin. However, during the meeting, he didn't see any sign of ice blood disease on Dragon Mother's body, which made him doubt that Dragon Mother didn't have ice blood disease. However, her crystallized body was so real, exactly like his right arm. However, she didn't show this power until now. There should be a big sequela, Dean thought. At this moment, Dragon Mother's combat power was slightly higher than the Dominator. She was one of the stronger ones among the Dominators. Her power was completely above the other two hunter families. The Rock Demon, as the strongest of the Rock family, had died in battle, which meant that he didn't have the same power as Dragon Mother. On the other side, the strongest of the Wing family was the same. They only had the power of the inner wilderness, but they weren't the top of the inner wilderness. Dragon Mother was on another level. If she could control this power freely, the Rock Tribe and the Wing Tribe would never have existed. This could only mean that this power would bring great sequela to her, and she couldn't use it at any time. She might have to pay a big price after using it once. It would save me a lot of trouble if she could directly kill these invaders. After she killed them, she would also fall into a period of weakness. Then the rest of the people. Thinking of the rest of the people, Dean couldn't help but look at the battlefield where Eureka and the others were fighting. He saw Eureka leading the pioneers to besiege Fatty and the other two invaders. The graceful woman was the most seriously injured. Her chest was stabbed, and there was a blood stain. Fatty, who had been unscathed all this while, was now covered in wounds. There were several purple and black patches on his skin, as if he had been poisoned. His movements were no longer as agile as before, and he had no time to take care of the graceful woman. The strongest of the Wing family, Eureka, and the two military masters. There are 4 inner wilderness powerhouses, and the rest of the pioneers and outer wilderness powerhouses. There are 18 people. Du Jian's eyes swept around, observing the situation on the battlefield. If Dragon Mother could kill the invaders, then it would be the weakest period of the inner wall. If Dragon Mother recovered, he would have almost no hope to occupy the inner wall. After all, the hidden power of Dragon Mother had really scared him. It was far beyond his expectation. Therefore, he had to take action when the battle was over. He couldn't give them time to recover. However, from the current situation, even with Aisha's help, it would be difficult to deal with so many pioneers. Dean didn't care about those ordinary pioneers. Even if there were twice as many ordinary pioneers, he wouldn't put them in his eyes. No one could withstand his sharp attack, and they would die in a single touch. But the 4 inner wilderness powerhouses were a bit tricky. With Aisha's strength, she could only contain one of them. Moreover, these people were not stupid. Once they fought, they would be aware of Aisha's special situation. They could let one of them delay Aisha, and the other 3 could kill Dudian. Although Aisha's current strength belonged to the top level of the inner wilderness, but she lost in awareness. It was very difficult to deal with an inner wilderness level powerhouse in a short period of time. Dean didn't want to let Aisha take action as much as possible. In the current situation, there were only 4 inner wilderness level powerhouses left. It was meaningless to let Aisha deal with one of them. With his current strength, it was too difficult to deal with the masters of the inner wall. It was almost impossible. But once he missed this opportunity, it would be even more difficult to let Dragon Mother recover. Moreover, he didn't know when the Wall Lord, who was at the level of Abyss Walker, would return. Once he appeared, Dudian could only slip away to live in the wilderness outside the giant wall. He didn't dare to step half a step near the giant wall. Therefore, there was only one opportunity in front of him. Dudian was thinking while paying attention to the movements on both sides of the battlefield. The hunchbacked old man was being chased by Dragon Mother. His body was torn by Dragon Mother's claws. Some parts of his body were frostbitten, and his blood vessels were sealed. The defeat was almost irreversible. Dudian saw that the old man didn't make any move. He knew that the old man didn't have any cards up his sleeves. This meant that Dragon Mother would win. A trace of ruthlessness flashed in his eyes. He no longer hesitated as he rushed into the battlefield. He used the demonic body and turned into a terrifying monster with sharp blades all over his body. He rushed towards the battlefield where Eureka was. Eureka noticed the amazing aura coming from behind. She turned her head and recognized that the monster was Dudian. There was a trace of surprise in her eyes. She recognized Dudian's demonic body. The National Master also had such a demonic body. She didn't expect that Dudian, a resident of the Outer Wall, could get the magic marks of the legendary monster Splitter. Moreover, there seemed to be some differences between Dudian's demonic body and the National Master's, but she couldn't tell what the differences were. It seemed that the number of sharp blades on his body was more, and the luster of each part of the shell was slightly different. "Where's Haisha?" Eureka withdrew from the battle and retreated to the outer edge. She anxiously asked Dudian, who was approaching at high speed. Dean rushed to her and stopped, saying, "She'll be here soon. I'll support her first." Not good. His pupils suddenly shrank as he looked at the front of Eureka in horror. Eureka's heart skipped a beat. She quickly turned around and saw that the battle in the encirclement was still going on. The 3 invaders had not broken free from the encirclement of the outstanding pioneers. Suddenly, an ominous feeling rose in her heart. Before she could turn around, a murderous aura suddenly burst out from behind her. Eureka turned her head in horror. She saw Dudian's fair and handsome cheeks were full of dense killing intent. The sharp blades on his body were attacking her head, chest, and other fatal parts. Puff! A cutting sound rang out. Blood sputtered. Eureka's body flew upside down. After flying a few rounds in the air, she landed on one foot. Her body crawled on the ground like a civet. Her eyes were red as she stared at Dadian angrily. There was a scratch on her neck. It was shallow, but it had already cut her carotid artery. There were also a few bloody holes on her chest, arms, shoulders, and other places, but there were no fatal injuries. She raised her hand to cover the carotid artery, pressing down the flowing blood. She gritted her teeth, and her eyes were full of hatred. How could she not understand that Dadian had betrayed them? At this critical moment, he actually attacked her and helped the invaders. This kind of betrayal made her particularly angry. She couldn't wait to tear Dadian into pieces with her eyes. Dadian's heart sank when he saw that she had escaped the fatal attack. He secretly regretted it. At the same time, he also felt a trace of fear. He had seen Eureka's quick reaction before, but he didn't expect her nerve reaction speed to be so fast. In such a short moment, she could actually escape his sneak attack at such a close distance. It was simply terrifying. If it was a head-on fight, even if he was full of sharp weapons, it was estimated that it would be difficult to hurt her even a little bit. He didn't continue to chase Eureka. Instead, he immediately changed his direction and rushed to the encirclement of the three invaders. The surrounding pioneers were focused on attacking the three invaders. When they saw Dadian coming over, they didn't think much. However, when Dadian approached them, they immediately attacked. In the blink of an eye, several pioneers were caught off guard and were injured by the sneak attack. 2 of them were beheaded on the spot and died. When Fatty saw Dadian, he thought that Dadian had come to help these people to encircle and annihilate them. His eyes showed anger. However, the next moment, when he saw Dadian's attack, he was stunned for a moment. He quickly reacted and immediately moved closer to Dadian. Inform your boss to retreat immediately. I've left a trap under the wall of size leading to the outer wall. It can help you cover your retreat. Dadian joined the encirclement of the 3 people and repelled the surrounding pioneers. At the same time, he whispered quickly, "Leave immediately." That dragon mother has used a special method to enhance her strength, but it should only be maintained for a very short time. After this period, it won't be too late to kill back. Hearing Dadian's words, Fatty raised his head and glanced at the distance. When he saw Dragon Mother's whole body had turned into ice, his face changed. "Gather at my territory. I'll go first. You guys hurry up." Dadian didn't wait for his reply. He killed his way out of the encirclement and fled all the way to the distance. Seeing Dadian escape, Eureka gritted her teeth and shouted to the pioneers who were chasing Dadian, "Don't worry about him. Kill them first." The pioneers heard her words and stopped immediately. They turned back to continue to encircle Fatty and the others. Eureka also joined the battle. She was angry and annoyed. The reason why she didn't send people to chase Dadian was that Aisha was behind him. Moreover, Dadian's strength was not inferior to the god of war at the peak of the outer wasteland. If they wanted to chase Dadian, they would have to send at least 2 inner wasteland-level powerhouses. Otherwise, they would die. Once they sent people to chase Dadian, it would be easy for the 3 invaders to escape. She was worried that Dadian deliberately lured her to chase him and contain their strength so that the invaders could escape. In a blink of an eye, Dadian rushed out 7 or 8 miles away. He jumped onto a roof and stopped. Seeing that no one was chasing him, he was relieved. Then he looked at the battle in front of him. He believed that the invaders should have a way to break out of the encirclement. Once they caught up with him, he could act according to his plan. A few minutes later, as Dadian expected, Fatty passed the news to the stooped old man. The stooped old man pinned down Dragon Mother. Fatty suddenly broke out and tore a gap in the encirclement. He took the other 2 people to kill them. However, halfway through the fight, Eureka and the others saw through their intentions and attacked with all their might. The graceful woman was killed on the spot, her head separated from her body. Fatty was sad and angry. He didn't irrationally take revenge for the graceful woman. Instead, he took the other person to kill them out of the encirclement and fled in the direction of Dudian. Dudian immediately turned around and ran. He couldn't wait for them to catch up, especially the stooped old man. Once he brought Dragon Mother, no matter who it was, they could easily catch up with him and kill him. Dudian used the magic wings and rushed forward. In the blink of an eye, he rushed out of King's city and flew into the wilderness. After flying at full speed for more than an hour, Dudian arrived at the sign wall. At this moment, there were 7 or 8 frontiersmen patrolling the sign wall. They immediately issued a warning when they saw Dudian flying over. Dudian landed and quickly killed all the guards on the wall. He took out a signal tube that was commonly used by hunters outside the giant wall. He held it in his hand. He was a little nervous as he waited quietly. After a moment, several shadows appeared in the distant sky and rapidly approached. They were the intruders led by the stooped old man. However, there were only 3 of them. The 5th brother who was fighting with the Wing family powerhouse was gone. There were only the stooped old man, the burly man, and Fatty. All 3 of them had injuries and the smell of blood on their bodies. They were quite embarrassed. Dudian's eyes flashed. When they got close, he shouted, "Are there any pursuers?" The stooped old man panted slightly. His eyes were deep. He looked at Dudian and said in a low voice, "They're not far behind. Has the person who fought with you caught up?" Dudian continued to ask. "No." The stooped old man's answer was very brief. Dean looked behind them. At the end of the horizon in the wasteland, he could vaguely see some black spots approaching. He looked up and said to the 3 people who were flying over, "Go to my territory first. Heal your wounds, and then come back." The stooped old man did not speak. He nodded and flew over the sign wall. Dudian flew behind them. After flying for thousands of meters, he opened the signal tube in his hand, and a red smoke bomb rushed into the sky. The stooped old man turned his head. His eyes flashed with murderous intent. He said coldly, "What is this?" "Signal flare." Dudian seemed to say without hesitation, "I said, I will cover them. They're catching up. My people will delay them when they pass through here. They should be able to stop some of them. As for the rest, you should be able to easily deal with them with your strength. They won't dare to chase too deep." The Dragon Mother did not catch up, but the others did. Dudian estimated that Yulida and the others were very anxious at this moment. In their eyes, this was the only chance to kill the intruders and take back the god's corpse, but it was ruined by him. The stooped old man stared at Dudian. He did not say much. He adjusted his breathing and tried to recover as much as possible while rushing on. Just when they were about to reach Mount Utopia, an earth-shaking roar came from afar. It was as if a mountain had fallen from the sky and smashed on the ground. The rumbling sound caused the ground to shake, and the aftermath spread dozens of miles away. Chapter 778. The hunchbacked old man's heart skipped a beat when he heard the loud explosion. He turned around and saw a huge cloud of dust rising from the wall of size. The cloud of dust rose several hundred meters high in the blink of an eye, and could be seen even from dozens of miles away. The 3 of them didn't expect Dean to set such a dangerous trap. Fortunately, he didn't use it against them. There was a trace of coldness in their eyes as they looked at Dean. He mercilessly attacked the people inside the wall and helped them. It could be seen that this person was not an ordinary person. In the blink of an eye, Dean, the old man, and others flew over Utopo Mountain. Dean took the lead to land. He glanced around but didn't see Noise and others. He was relieved as he quietly walked into the temple. The attendants of light who were stationed outside the temple saluted respectfully as they saw Dean. They looked towards the direction of the sighing wall after Dean entered the temple. They could faintly hear the huge explosion. It was hard to imagine what had happened. Stooped old man and others followed Dean into the temple. Stooped old man's heart was relieved. He knew that the master of the devil family didn't chase them. There were only some ordinary pioneers and masters of the inner wilderness. The strength of the trap left by Dean was enough to make them suffer. Even if they caught up, he could deal with it. He immediately found a chair and sat down after entering the temple. He took out the healing medicines from his backpack and didn't talk to Dean. The burly man and Fatty looked at Dean. They wanted to say something, but they held back. They could guess that Dean spared no effort to help them because he was worried that they would die. No one would kill the masters of the inner wall for him. Both sides were taking advantage of each other. Hurry up and heal. We'll go back as soon as your injuries are healed. We can't delay, or the next attack will be more difficult. Dean said to the three of them. Stooped old man's lips slightly moved. He wanted to say something, but soon stopped. He closed his eyes and focused on healing his injuries. Fatty saw his reaction and immediately understood his thoughts. He didn't talk to Dean, but took out the healing medicines for himself. Dean's eyes flashed as he saw that the three of them were in a hurry to heal. He sat on the throne and put his palm on the armrest. His fingertips touched the groove on the inside of the armrest and gently pressed it. A slight cracking sound echoed throughout the temple. The sound was so soft that even a hunter might not be able to hear it. However, the hunchbacked old man and his two companions had keen hearing. They immediately sensed the abnormality and raised their heads to look around. In the next moment, a pitch-black hole appeared on the pillars, walls, and ground of the divine temple. Water arrows shot out from the hole and into the hall below the stairs. The three of them's face changed. Although they didn't know the reason, they knew that it wasn't a good thing. Just as the three of them were ready to get up and hide, their bodies suddenly froze. They stood or sat in the same place as if they were stunned. The stooped old man was stunned for a moment before his eyes widened in anger. He abruptly stood up from his chair, and a pair of demonic wings sprouted from his back. He floated in the air, his eyes filled with anger and killing intent as he turned to look at the throne. When he looked back, he saw Dean sitting on the throne, sinking. You trash, get ready to die. Your seventh brother has been killed by me. Do you want to go back? Obediently die. Dean changed his previous reserved appearance and looked at stooped old man contemptuously. Stooped old man's pupils shrank as he heard Dean's words. He was so angry that his eyes almost burst out. It was obvious that they were deceived by Dean. The most important thing was that the seventh brother who was responsible for the return trip was dead. No wonder he saw the seventh brother's finger in the second auction. He was puzzled at that time, but he didn't dare to think about it. Now it seemed that the seventh brother was obviously dead. Dean just used the seventh brother's body to pretend that the seventh brother was in his hands. He wanted to take advantage of them. Ah! The stooped old man roared as he rushed towards Dean. Go to! He hadn't finished the last word when a fire instantly spread throughout the temple. It was as if a hole had been pierced in the sky. The monstrous flames and thick smoke instantly submerged everything. If one looked down from the sky, they would see that the sacred Utopia mountain had exploded at this moment. Wu Tuol Mountain, which was more than 400 meters tall, exploded like a volcano. The destructive explosion produced a deafening boom. The streets more than 10 kilometers away from the Divine Mountain were swept up by the violent wind generated by the explosion. The pedestrians on the streets were instantly blown away, and some of the fluttering merchant flags were even snapped in half. Countless tiny stones and metal shards shot out. Some pedestrians on the streets were shot through the head or body by the stones. The destructive heat wave spread out, sweeping up the thick fog and dust into every street. With the entire holy mountain as the center, it was as if a magnitude 12 earthquake had occurred. The ground rumbled, and the dust was like a beast tide that engulfed everything. This explosion happened in an instant. At the moment of the explosion, the entire Wu Tuol Mountain was instantly destroyed. Like a delicate porcelain suddenly shattering, the mountain was blown into ashes. The destructive power of doomsday spread out. The Knights of Light who were patrolling the mountain, as usual, did not even have the time to react. In an instant, they were engulfed by the explosion, their bodies shattered and evaporated. The aftershock of the explosion spread quickly. It was more than 10 times more violent than the explosion of the Wall of Sighs. At this moment, people in all areas of the commercial district felt the ground shaking and trembling. They also heard the angry explosion coming from the distance. Everyone stopped what they were doing and looked up in the direction of the sound source in amazement. This, in an office of the military headquarters, the teacup on Richelieu's table fell down. The tea soaked the documents he had just processed, but his eyes were staring blankly at the direction of Utopia Mountain outside the window. The corner of his mouth was slightly trembling. With a swoosh, a large number of stones were ejected from the explosion of the divine mountain. Among them, a pitch-black oval-shaped object flew out along with the stones. After flying for 200 to 300 meters horizontally from the top of the divine temple that was hundreds of meters high, it fell on the ground in a parabolic trajectory and hit a castle. It penetrated the castle and landed in the courtyard of the castle. It rolled over a dozen times before stopping, black smoke rising from it. This was not a stone, but an elliptical metal ball 5 or 6 meters high. But at this moment, the metal ball was broken at one end. Chapter 779. With a clang, a sharp claw suddenly extended from the edge of the crack. Immediately after, a terrifying shadow with sharp blades all over its body emerged from within, scaring the curious hound into whining and running away. The ferocious figure was Dean. He slowly crawled out of the metal ball. He couldn't help but cough every time he crawled out. Blood splashed on the ground. He grimaced in pain. It took a lot of effort to drag his body out. He turned over and lay on the ground, gasping for breath. Drowsiness overcame him, forcing him to keep his eyes open. After resting for a moment, he crawled up from the ground, his body swaying. A few sharp blades on his back had broken off and stabbed into his body, causing quite a bit of injury. The biggest wound was caused by a piece of metal on his chest, which had pierced through his demonized armor and stuck in his ribs, bleeding nonstop. Fortunately, he had entered the metal ball and displayed his demonic body. Otherwise, this piece of metal would not just be stuck in his ribs, it would have pierced through his chest and killed him on the spot. He took a light breath to relieve the burning pain on his body. He looked up at the direction of the explosion in the distance. There was a trace of palpitation in his eyes. He didn't expect the destructive power of the explosion to be so terrifying. When he activated the explosive device, he had already sunk into the protective cabin. The protective cabin was made of tungsten steel and was incomparably tough. However, it was penetrated by the shock wave of the explosion. The aftershock almost took half of his life. It must be known that he had used his demonic body to protect himself. If he hadn't felt it, he couldn't imagine what would have happened to him. He thought of the old man and the other two. At the last moment, except for the old man who broke away from the electric current, the fat man and the other burly man seemed to be in a state of paralysis. It was almost impossible to make a protective response in that state. Even if they woke up in time, it would be difficult to react. Moreover, the power of the gunpowder explosion in Mount Wu-Tua had exceeded his expectations. He had thought that it would be good if it could seriously injure the three of them. But judging from the current situation, the three of them had less than a 10% chance of surviving. He had deliberately exposed the death of the black-robed young man to the hunchbacked old man in order to infuriate him and make him chase him. Then, he would lead the old man to the second base. There were twice as many wind and solar power stations and more than 3 times as many explosives as here. There was a great chance that he could blow up the hunchbacked old man. But judging from the current situation, it was most likely not necessary. Now that he thought about it, he still felt a burst of fear. After all, he was not an explosives expert. His estimation of explosives was not so accurate, especially such a large amount of explosives. Even a professional explosives expert might not be able to estimate how much damage it would cause. After all, there were no advanced instrument from the old era that could evaluate specific detailed data. If there were more explosives in Mount Wu-Tua, or if he had not prepared the tungsten steel protective cabin, he would probably have died in the explosion and perished together with the 3 intruders. Fortunately, such a mistake did not happen. Otherwise, he would really want to cry, but have no tears. Looking at the gradually subsiding explosion in the distance, Dean exhaled lightly and slowly stood up. His muscles immediately affected the metal plate on his chest. He slightly bared his teeth and made up his mind. The demonization of his body was lifted, and he returned to his human appearance. He raised his hand to cover the huge metal plate stuck in his chest and pulled it out. Puff! A violent tearing pain almost made him cry out in pain. Fortunately, the violent pain was only temporary. He gritted his teeth and used the dragon blood technique to control the flow of blood in his body. He stopped the bleeding in his chest. He felt as if his chest was being burned by fire, and the pain was unbearable. However, he had experienced this degree of pain many times. He took a few deep breaths and let himself adapt. He dragged his feet in the direction of Mount Wu-Ta. His pupils entered the state of X-ray vision, searching for the figures of the three intruders. Although the power of the explosion was enough to kill them, he could not relax until he saw their bodies. The explosion came very abruptly and ended very quickly as well. The gunpowder burned out in an instant, and the curtains fell on the ground. Wu-Ta Mountain was no longer a tall mountain, only thick smoke and dust that rose up like a tall mountain. Inside the smoke, there was a faint blood-red flame that looked terrifying. Dean walked to the original square in front of the mountain. His eyes penetrated the thick fog and immediately saw the destructive traces brought by the terrifying explosion. The area more than 100 meters around Mount Wu-Ta was completely sunken. Whether it was the square or the castle-like buildings, they were all razed to the ground. The street more than 200 meters away was also a mess. The road was full of gravel and thick dust, and there were passers-by screaming on the ground. Dean's scalp tingled. Although he was only standing on the ground at the moment, a picture emerged in his mind. The entire Mount Wu-Ta had completely disappeared. The ground at the foot of the mountain had collapsed into a huge crater. Burning smoke was emitted from the soil. The land had experienced the baptism of explosives and became incomparably black, like human skin that had been burned. Except for this big crater, there was nothing left here. Many buildings on the mountain, the temple, the laboratory, the monument of the goddess, and so on were all gone. It seemed that they had never existed. For the first time, Dean witnessed such a terrible destruction. The first thought in his mind was that the world had started nuclear weapons in the old era. Black gunpowder alone had such a terrible effect. No wonder there was no peace in the world after the nuclear explosion. Just like the ruins outside the giant wall, the nuclear radiation in the air was still silently invading the bodies of the survivors after more than 300 years. He took a deep breath and looked around. The old man and the other two were likely to be blown away and fell in a place far away. He stimulated his magic wings and rushed into the thick smoke and black fog. He squinted his eyes and searched around. At the same time, he was vigilant of the surroundings, guarding against possible sneak attacks at any time. 4 or 5 minutes later, Dean found a figure on the west side of Mount Wu-Ta. The heat source concentration was limited. He immediately rushed over and saw the figure lying in the ruins of a building that had been smashed by gravel. It was the old man. At the moment, the old man seemed to have fainted. His body was covered with scars. Large and small gravel and metal pieces were embedded in his body. In addition, one of his legs was blown off. His hair was burnt black and fluffy. Dean's heart relaxed. His eyes were slightly bright. There was an unexpected feeling of surprise. He took out the dagger that he carried with him and slammed it toward the old man's throat. Ding! The dagger stabbed into the old man's throat, but was blocked by the demonized scales on his neck. Chapter 780. At this moment, Dean was extremely nervous. He was worried that the old man would pretend to be unconscious and deliberately lure him closer. But he had to make a move. There was only one chance. If the old man really fainted, then his caution would be stupid. Whoosh! Dean's sharp limbs instantly approached the old man, all pointing at the weak parts of the old man's body. Dean's heart was in his throat. The next moment, the sharp limbs all hit the old man. But the old man's fine scales were extremely tough, beyond Dean's imagination. They were far harder than steel. The old man's sharp limbs barely pierced into the old man's body, but failed to penetrate. At this time, the old man seemed to be stimulated by the pain. He groaned and opened his eyes. Seeing the old man open his eyelids, Dean's heartbeat almost stopped. The gap in strength between the two made him feel the crisis of death instantly. His brain was hot. He roared and madly waved all the sharp limbs to stab out. Die! He roared. The sickle-like limbs turned into countless afterimages, madly shooting out. The speed was so fast that it was only a phantom. He didn't know how long the attack lasted. When Dean felt a sense of extreme weakness in his heart, he slowly woke up. The fast-waving sharp limbs also slowly stopped. He looked at the old man in front of him, but saw that the old man's body was broken. There was no sound, and his death was tragic. There were bloody holes in the old man's throat, chest, head, and other fatal parts. Especially the neck, it was almost completely broken, leaving only a trace of blood hanging. Dean couldn't help but lift a few sharp limbs to stab the old man's body along the wound. He lifted the old man's body and repeatedly looked at it several times. Finally, he was sure that the old man was dead. His heartbeat had stopped. Through X-ray, he could see that the old man's heart was cut into a small piece, and the spine and the neck was cut off. He was dead. The ruler of the giant wall was dead. He died in front of him. Dean had an unreal feeling. All of this seemed to be much easier and smoother than he had expected. The second base that he had prepared as the next trap was completely useless. He breathed heavily, and only after a long time had passed did he slowly regain his calmness. With a wave of his arm, the stooped elder's head was completely cut off. Then he carried the elder's head and soared into the air, flying above the ruins of the explosion. He looked around, searching for the remaining two intruders' figures. Even though there were no other high-level heat being released to the scene, he couldn't rule out the possibility that they were hiding their heat. If he was alive, he wanted to see him. If he was dead, he wanted to see his corpse. Otherwise, his heart would not be at peace. Half an hour later, Dean finally found the bodies of the other two intruders. Half of the fat man's head and one of the arms of the burly man. There was also a magic hunting tool. Dean flew back to the old man's broken headless body. Now, he was basically sure that all three intruders died here. It was inconceivable that the intruders who were a headache to the inner wall had died in his hands. However, he had mobilized almost all the resources of the outer wall in order to prepare for this day. He had filled the mountain with more than 1,000 tons of gunpowder. He had spent a lot of manpower on mining and production. In addition, he had lured the intruders here so that they would be defenseless. It was a crucial step. Any mistake in this step could lead to a different situation. His purpose of detonating the wall was to make the three of them relax their vigilance in addition to blocking the pursuit of the inner wall. It must be known that the impact of intentional and unintentional resistance were two completely different levels. He heaved a sigh of relief and felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. His physical strength seemed to have been completely overdrawn. He sat on the ground to rest and recover. At the same time, he took out another signal tube from his bag and pulled it open. A green smoke bomb immediately rose into the sky. After a moment, the sound of horses' hooves echoed. Noise led a team of Knights of Light. Noise and the Knights of Light were aghast as they saw the ruins around Dudian. If it wasn't for the outline of the surrounding buildings, they wouldn't dare to imagine that this huge pit was Utopo Mountain, which was full of holy flowers. Noise ran over as he saw Dean's pale face. "Master, how are you? Are the invaders all dead?" "Dead," Dean panted. "Send people to block this place and find the pieces of their bodies. Also send someone to bring Aisha. I'm going to the inner wall." Noise was relieved as he heard that the intruders were dead. He knew that the main purpose of the plan was to kill the intruders. But he didn't expect that it would be over before Dean could finish the last step of the plan. He looked at the terrible wound on Dean's chest. He took out the healing and antidote from his bag and handed them to Dean. "The intruders have been dealt with. Why do you still want to go to the inner wall? Why don't you wait for your injuries to heal first?" Dean took the medicine and said, "The master of the inner wall is seriously injured. I have to kill her before she recovers. Otherwise, it will be difficult to find such an opportunity in the future. If I don't come back, then it's likely that I won't be able to come back. Let Sergei and the others leave the Holy Church and live incognito. Noyce's heart throbbed as he listened to Dean's last words. Master, don't be discouraged. You will definitely come back. You are the only person who has escaped from Thornflower Prison for hundreds of years. What is this little difficulty? Dean smiled bitterly. The escape from Thornflower Prison was nothing to him. But it seemed that it left a deep impression in Noyce's heart. Dean sighed. He thought that if he had more pioneers to help him, then his chances of survival would be much higher. Unfortunately, he could only fight alone. Aisha was the only one who could accompany him. Noyce saw the bitterness in Dean's eyes. He wanted to say something, but he held back. He knew that it was useless to encourage Dean at this moment. But it seemed that it left a deep impression in Noyce's heart. He thought that if he had more pioneers to help him, then his chances of survival would be much higher. Unfortunately, he could only fight alone. Aisha was the only one who could accompany him. Dean patted Noyce's shoulder. Don't worry. Aisha will accompany me. Nothing will happen. Go and bring her here. I'll heal first. I know. Noyce took a deep breath and nodded. He turned around and ordered a group of Knights of Light to guard Dean. Dragon Mother hasn't chased after us. Most of the sequelae have flared up and she needs to recuperate. Otherwise, she wouldn't miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I hope that the dragon family doesn't have any medicine that can restore her combat effectiveness. Otherwise, it will be a disaster. Dean sat on the ground. A young Knight of Light put a stone on his back to lean on. Dean looked at the young knight and thanked him. He used dragon blood technique to speed up the recovery of his injuries. At the same time, he was thinking about the chances of going to the inner wall. The young knight knew that Dean was a big shot. He was flattered and stayed with the other Knights of Light to guard Dean. Dean's injuries were almost healed after 2 hours. Noyce sent Aisha to Dean. Dean's last order to Aisha was to stay in place. But in her mind, there was no such thing as stay in place. She just needed to keep her body stiff. That's why she could be transported to the second base by Noyce and from the second base to here. Dean got up and took Aisha's hand. He took a deep look at her face and whispered, "This time it's very likely that you will have to make a move. It's a great opportunity. You won't be angry, right?" Aisha was silent. Dean held her hand and looked at Noyce. "I'm going. I'll leave the matters here to you." Noyce was worried. "Be careful." He didn't use honorifics, but his words were more sincere than ever. Dean looked at him and nodded. "I will." He flew towards the inner wall with Aisha in his arms. Flying high up in the sky, he could see everything on the ground more clearly. He saw that Mount Wu Tuo had disappeared, and in its place was a huge, charred crater. In the surrounding 7 to 8 miles of streets, there were faintly visible earthquake-like cracks, and the aftermath of the explosion spread very far. Dean saw a lot of civilians gathering in the direction of Wu Tuo Mountain. He was afraid that there would be no more Wu Tuo Mountain from now on. He liked this mountain in his heart. Perhaps it was because of the difference between its name and the word utopia in the old era. But both were symbols of beauty. When he flew to the wall, Dudeen suddenly saw a shocking scene. The wall that had been erected for more than 200 years had a huge hole in it. The edge of the hole was somewhat black, and there was a faint smell of blood and gunpowder near the hole. In addition, there were some soldiers stationed here, including 2 pioneers. The reason why Dean dared to pass through here was that he didn't see any pursuers during the more than 2 hours of recuperation. So he inferred that the pursuers should be injured by the explosion and didn't dare to continue to pursue. At the moment, there were only 2 pioneers, and they seemed to be ordinary pioneers. Dean didn't hesitate and immediately swooped down. The 2 pioneers also saw Dean flying in the sky. Their faces suddenly changed. They hurriedly ordered the patrolling soldiers to send out a signal flare. Dean quickly landed and put Aisha on the wall. Then he stimulated the demon body and rushed towards the 2 pioneers. The 2 pioneers didn't dare to hold back. They stimulated the demon body at the first time. The young pioneer was the Black Weaver. After stimulating the demon body, she immediately drilled into the rock. The other one was like a porcupine. His whole body was covered with steel thorns. His hands turned into claws. He crawled on the ground and fled quickly. Dean flapped his wings and instantly accelerated to catch up with him. The sharp blade on his back suddenly stabbed out. Puff! Puff! The blade easily penetrated the pioneer's body like piercing tofu. With a swing of the strange limb, the pioneer's body was instantly halved. Blood and intestines flowed everywhere. He was directly killed. After several battles with pioneers, Dean's current combat experience was different from the past. Ordinary pioneers were not his opponents. Although these ordinary pioneers had fought far more than Dean, their combat skills were not necessarily better than his. Some people had fought 10 times and gained more experience than those who had fought hundreds of times. This kind of people were usually called geniuses, and Dean was such a genius. Moreover, the abnormal part of the Splitter's magic mark was its terrible cutting power. There were few opponents of the same level, not to mention that Dean's physique was a grade higher than the opponent's. Whoosh! Dean turned around and flew back to Aisha, hugged her body, and continued to fly forward, ignoring the black weave magic mark pioneer who had burrowed into the ground. Entering the inner wall area, he flew over the wilderness and went straight to the dragon family's territory. After about 2 hours, Dean finally came to the dragon family's territory. Unlike the rock family, the dragon family did not build their territory in the cities, but in the suburbs outside the 2 cities connecting the 2 cities. The dragon family lived in the mountains, surrounded by peaks. If one walked in, it was very easy to get lost. Who are you? Stop! In front of the mountain gate, 8 dragon family guards on duty shouted at Dean. Dean's eyes flashed coldly. He suddenly accelerated and swooped down toward them. Seeing Dean approaching at high speed, the 8 people's faces changed. There was a trace of panic in some of their eyes. They saw Dean's terrible strength, but they did not dare to escape because of their duty. All of them pulled out their weapons and rushed to Dean. Puff, 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 puff. Dean's figure flew straight, almost without a pause. Behind him, a blood mist exploded. The bodies of the 8 Lemeter guards were broken, and they died on the spot. This is the family you've been guarding. I haven't seen you for a short time, but you can't even recognize me. Dean held Aisha and flew up the stairs, his eyes cold. They all deserved to die. Aisha was held in Dean's arms like a princess. She was silent, but her pure black eyes seemed to flash slightly. Dean quickly flew to the hillside. There was a large building, the style of which was a bit like the ancient houses of the East. It was built with wood and had a unique charm. At this moment, the guard station in the hillside square saw Dean and immediately shouted angrily. Chapter 781. Dean turned a blind eye to the constant gathering of guards on the hillside square. He descended from the sky with Aisha in his arms. His magic wings retracted behind his back, and the terrifying sharp blades on his body fell to the ground, leaving a groove on the floor. He put Aisha down, took her hand, and whispered, "You will see your father later. I will ask him why he indulges Haley so much. Is his blood as cold as my hands?" Aisha was silent and let him lead her. Dean looked up and stepped forward, looking down on everything. "Stop! Who dares to break in my dragon family's territory? Go forward and kill him." The guards gathered in front of Dean, blocking his way, and said with a ruthless look. Some of the guards saw Dean holding Aisha's hand, and their eyes showed a surprised and uncertain look. At the moment, Aisha's face was covered with a veil, but this thin layer of veil couldn't hide her beautiful appearance. Her clothes and temperament made them think of a person. Seeing that Dean didn't stop, several guards finally couldn't bear it. They roared, waved their weapons, and rushed toward Dean. Puff! Puff! Several guards rushed toward Dean, but their bodies suddenly froze in place, and their faces were full of disbelief. Dean's eyes were indifferent as he held Aisha's hand and walked straight ahead. Several guards barely turned their eyes and stared at Dean in horror. The next moment, a lot of blood spurted out from their necks and chests. The impact of the blood broke their bodies and split them into a pile of body parts. Then, they fell to the ground. Other guards saw such a strange scene, and the anger on their faces suddenly disappeared. Their faces were full of horror, and they kept retreating. Dean walked from the gate of the hillside to the square and the guards also retreated from the gate to the square. Whoosh! A figure rushed out from the hall behind the square and landed in front of the guards with a few leaps. He was a handsome young man. When he saw Dean's terrifying demonic body, his face slightly changed. Obviously, Dean's physique was at the pioneer level, and he had never seen such a demonic body shape before. It should be a rare legendary monster. The next moment, his eyes noticed Dean holding Aisha's hand, and he suddenly froze in place. Dean's footsteps didn't stop, and he was still moving forward step by step. It seemed that nothing could stop his pace. Feeling the amazing murderous aura, the handsome young man recovered and couldn't help but shout to Aisha, "Your Highness, you're finally back. We heard that you had an accident in the wasteland. It's great to see you back. Who is this?" He still had a lot to say, but seeing Dean's murderous aura, he had to open his mouth. Aisha naturally wouldn't answer him. Dean replaced Aisha's mouth, and his voice was very cold. "Get out of here if you don't want to die. Let the Patriarch and Dragon Mother come out to see me, or your dragon clan will die." The handsome young man was stunned. He didn't expect Dean's tone to be so arrogant, and he was accompanied by Aisha. He couldn't believe it. How could Aisha be with such a person? But seeing that Aisha didn't respond, he already knew what she meant. His face quickly sank. "It's impossible to see the Patriarch and Dragon Mother. Your Highness, you can't let this person mess around. He has killed our clansmen, and if he continues, he will become the #1 wanted target of our dragon clan. Kill him." Dean's eyes flashed coldly, and he no longer said anything. He let go of Aisha's hand and let her stand in place. The next moment, his figure suddenly rushed out, like a black phantom, and swept towards the handsome young man. The handsome young man's pupils shrank as he said in horror, "You dare!" His words stopped abruptly as his head flew high. Dean's sharp limbs trembled slightly as the head was about to hit the ground and split the head into two halves. He stepped over it and turned back to Aisha. He took her hand and continued to move forward. The handsome young man probably didn't expect that only two people would dare to kill in the dragon clan. Moreover, one of them was Aisha. All the dragons knew that Aisha had sheltered the dragon clan many times. He didn't expect Dean to attack because of Aisha's presence. Otherwise, he wouldn't dare to let Dean get close to him even if he was careless. Whoosh! Whoosh! On the distant hillside, two figures flew fast, one in front and one behind. At the same time, there was a rustling sound from the foot of the hill and the sound of robes fluttering in the wind. Dean's pupils expanded to the maximum, and he saw blazing figures coming from all directions. All of them were pioneer-level masters, and many of them were at the peak of the outer wilderness. So far, there was no inner wilderness master. He was secretly relieved when he watched Yulida gather all the forces to besiege the invaders in the Padgel Mountains. He noticed that there were only 7 inner wilderness masters. In the battle in King City not long ago, Dragon Mother was the only one who was an inner Baron level master of the dragon tribe. Those who had reached the inner Baron level were basically the leaders of all forces. He had predicted the worst, that there would at most be 1 inner Baron level master in the dragon tribe's territory. But now, it seemed that there was not even one. "You once said that you don't have any friends. I'm the only friend you could talk to." Dean looked at the approaching pioneers with bloodthirsty, killing intent in his eyes. He whispered to Aisha, "Even if there are your friends among them, they deserve to die." Aisha was indifferent and didn't respond. At this time, pioneers from all directions arrived one after another. Dean released Aisha's palm and aimed at the pioneers who arrived first. His figure moved and suddenly jumped out, trying to kill as many as possible before all the pioneers gathered. The first to arrive was an old man in his 60s. He was thin, but his movements were extremely fast. He was shocked and angry when he saw the pools of blood on the square, the pieces of corpses on the ground, and the headless corpses. He roared and rushed toward Dean. However, Dean happened to rush towards him. Feeling Dean's amazing killing intent, the anger in Miff's heart was like cold water poured on his head. He sobered up in an instant. As an older pioneer who had participated in more than 5 hunting operations in the wasteland, the intuition brought by his combat experience told him that Dean in front of him was extremely dangerous and not someone he could match. He immediately braked, stimulated the demon body, and turned to run. The scene looked rather comical, and the guards who were waiting for reinforcements were dumbfounded. Whoosh! Dean's magic wings flapped, and the blade-like limbs on his back stretched in a strange posture. If there was a wind magic master here, he would find that each of Dean's blade-like limbs had a strange streamline, which could greatly reduce air resistance and even accelerate with the help of wind. This was the reason why the blade-like limbs' attack speed was beyond that of ordinary pioneers of the same rank. Dean was like a wild beast with its own propeller. In the blink of an eye, he caught up with Miff, and his arms quickly stretched out. Miff felt the terrible killing intent coming from his back. He turned around in horror, and the 2 new demonized arms under his armpits hurriedly grabbed. These arms were made of demonization, and when the demon body was removed, they would disappear. On the contrary, no matter how serious the injuries were, they would recover when the demon body was stimulated again. Therefore, in this instant, his first reaction was to block Dean's attack with the help of the demonized arms. Puff, puff, puff. 3 cutting sounds sounded almost at the same time, like a sharp knife cutting 3 pieces of cloth. The 2 demonized arms were cut off by Dean's scythe without any hindrance, and directly pierced into his back. Dean turned his arms, and blood spurted out. Miff's heart was instantly broken, and his eyes were panic-stricken. He fell to the ground and rolled several times. After killing this person, Dean did not stop. His eyes had already locked on the second target. He slightly turned his body, changed direction, and rushed to the second person. In the blink of an eye, he was in front of this person. This person's reaction was the same as Miff's, from anger to panic. When he wanted to escape, it was too late, and Dean quickly caught up and beheaded him. These pioneers' magic marks were good at speed, but they still couldn't escape from Dean. The horror of legendary magic marks was that even if they were the ultimate attack-type splitters, their speed and perception were not inferior to ordinary rare magic marks. This could be seen from their transparent pupils, super-range vision, and speed close to that of inner desolate level masters. After Dudian killed 2 people, the other pioneers who heard the news seemed to be aware of the changes here. The next moment, they gathered together. Dean aimed at the target and killed halfway. After killing 2 more people, the rest of the pioneers finally gathered together, but the number was only 5. Counting the 1 killed by Dean, there were a total of 9 people. Dean licked his lips, looking at the 5 pioneers who rushed together. 2 of them had reached the peak heat source of the outer desolate level, but Dean was not afraid. Instead, he felt inexplicably excited. The smell of blood on his body made him have a crazy impulse. Miff, Clancy. The 5 people were shocked, sad, and angry when they saw the 2 bodies falling on the edge of the square. One of the outer desolate level middle-aged men saw Dean, frowned, and whispered, "Be careful. This person should be the intruder. We can't let him go." Although he knew the existence of Dean in the outer wall, he was not interested in it, so he didn't know too much about it. Moreover, there were no photos in this era, only portraits, so he didn't recognize Dean. When the others heard the word intruder, the anger in their eyes suddenly became stronger. One of them roared and took the lead to rush over. Dean also rushed to the 5 people at high speed. It was the most suitable for him to deal with these pioneers in the battle against Dragon Mother. Go! The others roared, stimulated their own demonic bodies, and swarmed toward Dean. Dean's speed didn't decrease, and his blade-like limbs expanded outward like a weird ball full of sharp blades, which made people's scalp tingle. 2 of the 5 pioneers were assassins with weak defense, and they were good at hiding and using poison. At this moment, seeing Dean's ferocious demonic body, they felt a toothache and immediately rushed to the side, not daring to touch him. When Dean rushed out, he paid attention to the expressions of the 5 people, and soon locked on the 2 dodging people as his targets. He knew that often the lack of a certain aspect would be strengthened in another aspect, just like his splitter magic mark, which was good at attacking, but very weak in defense. However, his weak defense was only relative to other legendary magic marks. In terms of pure defense, it was only slightly inferior to the rare steel dragon magic mark. Whoosh! Dean rushed to one of the dodging people. Seeing Dean's speed, this person thought that he would meet the other three head-on, but he didn't expect that Dean would suddenly turn to kill him. His heart suddenly turned cold, and he knew that it was not good. He turned around and ran, trying to keep a distance from Dean. He complained in his heart. He couldn't figure out why Dean would attack him from afar. Moreover, he would fall into a situation where he would be attacked from both sides. The gains were not worth the losses. He even suspected that he had inadvertently offended Dean, but in his impression, there was no such person. Go to hell. A knight holding a spear roared and stabbed from behind Dean. The magic spear in his hand was a standard 4-meter-long lance. Although there was no horse, it was still extremely flexible in his hands. After all, his demonic body was nearly 4 meters tall, extremely thin, and his arms were very thin. His body looked soft like rubber, and there was a thin film on his spine like cicada wings. His demonic body was not much different from that of a human, but his skin was as gray as a corpse. However, this didn't mean that his demonic body was incomplete. On the contrary, his original body was less than 2 meters tall, but now it was nearly 4 meters tall. Although the body structure was similar to that of a human, it was also a complete demonic form. This was the form of a ghoul magic mark. Dean's blade-like limbs suddenly popped out and swept to the lance. 2 clangs sounded, and the lance was cut off. The knight was stunned for a moment, and his face was aghast. He didn't expect the blade-like limbs to be so terrifying. It was simply cutting iron like mud. If he was a little closer, he estimated that his whole body would be cut into several pieces. How could he fight in close combat? The other 2 also saw this scene, and their eyes were full of horror. The speed of the pursuit couldn't help but slow down, and they didn't know how to attack. Dean suddenly accelerated, shook off the 3 people, and quickly caught up with the person in front of him who was running away. No! The screams came to an abrupt end. When Dean's body was 3 meters away from his back, the sharp blade-like limbs flashed and turned into several afterimages. The next moment, Dean's body swept past, leaving a pile of body parts in the same place. Dean quickly turned and killed the other person. Chapter 782. Stop! Just as Dean was about to catch up with her, an angry roar sounded. Dean glanced at the source of the voice, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. The one who spoke was the current patriarch of the Dragon Clan. He was rushing down the steps from the slope. Dean snorted and suddenly accelerated. He quickly got close to the back of the round-faced young woman, and his sharp limbs shot out. The round-faced young woman was shocked, and her eyes were full of despair. She gritted her teeth, and her abdomen suddenly bulged. As Dean approached, she suddenly turned her head and spat out a green mucus. Puff! Puff! Dean's sharp limbs easily penetrated her body, as if stabbing into a bubble. But at the same time, the green mucus spat out by the round-faced young woman stained the sharp limbs. Dean felt a corrosive, burning sensation from the sharp limbs. His face changed slightly, and he immediately released the demon body. The black fluid condensed into the demon hunter knife, and the green mucus appeared on the knife. When the demon body was released, the demon hunter knife returned to a weapon, and the connection between it and Dean's body was cut off. He looked at the green mucus on the knife and smelled the stench. He immediately tore a piece of clothes from the round-faced young woman in front of him, rolled it into a ball, and wiped off the mucus, trying not to let it touch his body. Although this round-faced young woman was just an ordinary pioneer, a pioneer who was good at using poison couldn't be judged with common sense. Even if it was a poison created by a Lameter, if it was injected into a pioneer's blood, it would still be easily killed. He was glad that he used the demonic limbs to block the green mucus. If it fell on his body, even if he didn't die, his fighting strength would be greatly reduced. Mudley looked at the body of the round-faced young woman, and his eyes were slightly swollen. He clenched his fists and gritted his teeth. Our dragon clan has no enmity with you. Even if we caught you before, it was because Aisha privately taught you the secret technique, which violated the rules. You owe us a favor. Not only did we not kill you, but we also gave you resources to improve your strength. How could you bite the hand that feeds you? Dean looked at him, and then glanced at the other 3 people who were chasing him. He faintly smiled with a bit of ridicule. So, the patriarch knows about me. I didn't expect you to remember that little person. Since you came out, I want to ask you something. Aisha and Hathaway are your daughters. Don't you know what kind of character they are? What do you mean? Mudley's face was gloomy. How could Aisha steal the secret technique? Her character is very easy to understand. It's impossible that you don't know about it. Dean's voice was cold. You also know that Hathaway has been jealous of her sister for so many years. This is clearly a trap. It's ridiculous that you know about it, but still stick to the rules and punish Aisha. She was born with awakening ability. She was cultivated as a saint since childhood. How much has she done for the family? Hasn't she fought to protect your family every day of her life? But what about you? How did you treat her? Mudley's expression changed slightly. He said in a deep voice, this is her mission. If her sister had her talent, she would have received the same mission from a young age. This is the tradition of our dragon clan, and it is the same for other witch clans. This is not for you to criticize. Don't you think I would feel heartache for my own daughter? If you really feel heartache, then abolish the tradition for your daughter. Dean's eyes were cold. What qualifications do you have to be the patriarch if you can't protect your own daughter? What qualifications do you have to be her father? Even when she was in the wasteland, I didn't see your dragon clan grieve for her. Did anyone grieve for her? Did anyone go to the wasteland to look for her body? No. Dean's eyes were like a knife as he stared at Mudley. She is like a tool. When she is broken, she loses all her value and is abandoned by you. Is this the tradition of your family? It's true that you can prosper forever, but if this is the only way to maintain your prosperity, then what's the point of having this prosperity? Mudley angrily said, what do you know? Do you think it's as simple as you think? Do you know how many members there are in a family? Do you think you can do whatever you want? Wasteland is dangerous. She is dead. If we send people to look for her, then the loss will be even greater. Losing her is already a heavy price that we can't accept. If we lose more people because of this, it will only bring about more negative effects. Dean was startled as he heard Mudley's words. He almost couldn't believe his ears. Such cold-blooded and selfish words could come out from the mouth of a father. He suddenly felt heartache and sadness. He felt heartache because Aisha had sheltered such a group of people from childhood to adulthood. He felt sad because the latter was telling him such words in an angry tone. Mistakes weren't terrible. What was terrible was that it wasn't a mistake in his cognition. This kind of thinking was the most difficult thing to change, even if he killed him. Dean was silent for a moment. He slowly said, you can't afford to lose such a powerful fighting force. But you didn't see the love and loyalty behind this power. That is the most precious thing in the world, isn't it? Mudley coldly said, of course I know. I don't need you to tell me. I can understand the thoughts of a superior. Dean said to himself, the environment of a superior is very different from that of an ordinary person. Their first reaction is biased towards the perspective of interests, so they're used to thinking from the perspective of interests. However, thinking too much makes people utilitarian. When a person stares at one thing for a long time, he will slowly ignore other things. You're a qualified superior, but not an excellent one, because understanding people's hearts is the most important thing. Countless emperors have fallen because of this. Mudley's face was gloomy. What do you want to do here? Avenge her? Do you think Hathaway killed her? It means that you have a clear idea in your heart. It seems that you're also a person who deserves to die. Dean slightly raised his eyes and indifferently looked at him. I wanted to spare your life because you are her father. But since you have a clear idea in your heart, you let her be killed in such an inexplicable way. But you didn't help her get justice. A father like you is not worthy. Mudley sullenly said, they are my daughters. Although I have a guess, but this matter is unclear. Did you see with your own eyes that Hathaway framed her sister? Even so, I have lost a daughter. Do you want me to lose another one? Chapter 783. Mudley's face slightly changed as he clenched his fists. You dared to come here because you saw the battle between Dragon Mother and the invaders. You despicable villain. You didn't help the invaders when they invaded the giant wall. Don't you know that the people here will be plunged into misery and suffering? Do you think you can use them to strengthen yourself? They will kill you when no one in the inner wall can stop them. Dean was sure that Dragon Mother was recuperating at the moment as he saw Mudley's reaction. He calmed down. So many masters have gathered here to visit Dragon Mother. I also want to visit her. Show me the way. Bastard, do you think you are qualified to see Dragon Mother? A handsome youth shouted in anger. Mudray said coldly, do you think that you can trespass the territory of my dragon tribe just because the Dragon Mother is injured? If it wasn't for the fact that the intruder's whereabouts are unknown and the Dragon Mother is in charge, she would have come out and killed you long ago. It seemed that Dragon Mother was seriously overdrawn after using the ice blood disease. If she was forced to take action herself, then he would have to let Aisha fight against her. He wouldn't be able to fight against an inner Baron-level powerhouse, even if the latter was in a wounded state. He stared at Mudley's angry eyes and didn't show any weakness. You said so much because you are worried that I will let her take action. It seems that you know something about me. In that case, let me see Dragon Mother before I go on a killing spree. Mudley looked at him. You said that I am not worthy to be your father. What are you then? Although I don't know how you infected her and turned her into a corpse queen, but I advise you to free her. My daughter is not a tool for you to fight. Dean's face turned gloomy. I have never treated her as a tool for fighting. Mudley snorted. As far as I know, when Haley took people to kill you in the outer wall, it was because of her that you survived, right? You're just an outer-level pioneer. Even if you have the legendary magic mark of the Splitter, it is impossible for you to defeat Haley. Moreover, you have the magic scorpion god and the elder of the monastery with you. Do you dare to say that you didn't treat her as a tool? You brought her here because you were worried that you can't get out of here. So you let her take charge of the battle for you. Dean stared at him for a moment. I let her fight for me, but my purpose is different from yours. I believe that she will take the initiative to fight for me, even if she is conscious. But you let her guard the wasteland outside the giant wall day and night. This is not what she wants. But she has to do this for the family and the overall situation in your eyes because she is your daughter. You even think that she should do this because she is a saintess. But none of you ever asked her if she was willing to be the saintess, and if this was what she was pursuing. Mudley's face slightly changed. Of course I know that she doesn't want to be a saintess. She sneaked out when she was a child, but ran in the wrong direction and went to the outer wall. But why is she able to endure for so many years? How many people in this world can spend their whole life doing what they like and pursuing what they like? If she were here, do you think she would help you? This is the person she wanted to protect with all her might when she was alive. She can't refuse because her heart is too kind. If you don't exist, then she won't have so much pain. Even if there is pain, it will only be temporary. Dean's eyes were indifferent. I can give you a chance to live if you don't follow my path. I just want to get the highest power in the inner wall and use it to investigate the way to restore her. If there is no way to restore her consciousness, then go to the kingdom of God. I will restore her consciousness in my lifetime, even if I have to destroy all of you. Anyone who tries to stop me will die. You're crazy. Mudley looked at him in anger. How can a corpse restore consciousness? This is something that has never been heard for hundreds of years. Even the kingdom of God can't do it. You have killed so many people, but it is in vain. If killing people isn't enough, then kill the god. Dean's eyes were full of anger. You haven't been to the kingdom of God, so how do you know that it doesn't exist? Even if the kingdom of God doesn't exist, I will plunder the high-level resources of the world to create a way to restore her. I will bring her back from hell, even if she is dead. Mudley stared at him blankly. After a long time, he said, no matter what, don't even think about leaving this place today. You hurt my clansmen, and I will spare your life to pay for it. As for her, I will set her free after you die. She definitely doesn't want to see herself living like this. After all, this is what she hates the most. What do you know about freedom? Dean could not help but be furious. He suddenly made a move. His sharp limbs danced like a terrifying blade. His body suddenly swooped forward, but the moment he took 2 steps, he suddenly turned around and attacked in the opposite direction. The other 3 instinctively chased after Dean to stop him, but they were caught off guard by Dean's sudden attack. One of them was shocked as Dean instantly closed in on him. Puff, puff, puff. The man didn't have time to react as his body was cut into several pieces. His demonized body was covered with armor and looked extremely hard, but he was still killed in an instant. Seeing this scene, Mudley was furious. He roared and quickly demonized his body. His magic mark was the same as Haisha's, the Dragon Warrior's magic mark. It was ranked in front of Splitter among the legendary monsters. It had extraordinary defense and terrifying attack power. It was a rare magic mark with both offensive and defensive capabilities. Although its attack was slightly inferior to Splitter's, its defense was much better than Splitter's magic mark. Moreover, its flying speed was much faster than Splitter's, except that it couldn't enter the ground. It was extremely strong in air and land battles. Moreover, it could spit high-fat dragon breath, which was the nemesis of many magic marks. He demonized into a dragon and roared. His feet turned into dragon claws and stepped on the ground, leaving cracks on the floor. He rushed at Dean at high speed. Dean felt the blazing energy behind him and had to turn back to attack. His sharp limbs gathered into a huge sharp spine and stabbed at Mudley's chest. Chapter 784. Dean snorted coldly. The sharp blades on his body stretched outwards. His feet dislocated and twisted. His body spun at a high speed like a top. The blades he wielded turned into an airtight sphere in an instant. The faces of the 2 people behind Mudley and Dean changed. They had to stop and retreat. As they retreated, the dancing blades suddenly stopped. Dean turned around and pounced on an outer desolate level old woman behind him. The rib-like blades in front of his chest reached for her head. The old woman was horrified. She hurriedly waved her sword to block. With 2 clangs, the sword was cut into 3 pieces. Dean was faster than the old woman. Although they were both at the peak of the outer desolate, his legendary magic mark and the physique enhancement brought by deification were close to that of an inner desolate level expert. In addition, one was pouncing forward and the other was retreating. In the blink of an eye, Dean closed in on her. No! The old woman screamed in horror. When her demon hunting tool was directly cut by Dean, she knew how terrifying Dean's blade-like limbs were. In close combat, she had almost no chance of winning. Mudley roared and rushed over, but it was too late. Puff! The blade-like limbs in front of Dean's chest quickly shot out and pierced the old woman's chest. His scythe-like arms danced and cut off the old woman's head from the bridge of the nose. The incision was smooth, and the brain tissue was trembling inside. Dean pulled back the blade-like limbs and turned to kill Mudley. Mudley's eyes were filled with anger. He held the long spear in his demonic dragon claw and stabbed it like lightning. It just avoided the blade-like limbs in front of Dean's chest and stabbed into his chest. Dean felt a sharp pain in his chest. It seemed that something was broken. He roared angrily and waved his hand to cut. With a clang, the long spear in Mudley's hand was broken. At the same time, the blade-like limbs in front of his chest slashed toward Mudley's chest. Mudley didn't dare to resist it. He withdrew and retreated, but he was still cut by the tip of the blade-like limbs. A blood mark appeared on the demonic scales on his chest, and blood oozed out. Puff! When Dean repelled Mudley, he heard the sound of water spurting behind him. He glanced over and saw the young and handsome pioneer puffed up his cheeks like a toad and spurted out a bloody mist. In Dean's eyes, the mist contained numerous weak heat sources, which seemed to be numerous tiny lives. Dean dodged sideways, but was still stained by the blood mist. After all, The scope of the blood mist was too large. His face darkened. This was probably a poison attack. He didn't pay attention to Mudley anymore. He flapped his devil wings and dashed towards this handsome pioneer. "Stop right there!" Mudley roared angrily. A fiery crack appeared on his throat. The next moment, his abdomen shriveled, as if he had taken a deep breath and suddenly exhaled toward Dean's back. Dragon breath. A strong flame spurted out of his mouth. The surrounding air instantly heated up, and the flame went straight to Dean's back. Dean noticed his movement from the corner of his eyes. From this posture, he knew that the pioneer was going to use dragon breath to distance himself. However, the length of the dragon breath was longer than he expected, and the speed was frighteningly fast. In a straight line, it almost rushed to his front in an instant. He dodged sideways, but the flame still touched his devil wings. Suddenly, a violent burning sensation came from his devil wings. He looked out of the corner of his eyes and saw that the devil wings were burning. The flames spurted out by the dragon breath were not extinguished. Instead, they stuck to the devil wings and burned fiercely. The sharp pain drove him crazy, but he didn't flap his devil wings to disperse the flames on them. Instead, like a devil god, he rolled up his burning devil wings and rushed towards the handsome pioneer at an extremely fast speed. Seeing Dean's ferocious face rushing toward him, the handsome pioneer panicked and retreated in horror. However, his speed was also not as fast as Dean. Before he ran 20 meters, Dean caught up with him in several steps. He waved the sharp limbs in front of his chest and hugged the handsome pioneer tightly in his arms. Blood sputtered from his arms. The handsome pioneer's body was torn apart into 7 or 8 pieces. Dean roared and turned around, looking at Mudley behind him. Now he was the only pioneer left here. "You." Mudley looked at the pieces of body at Dean's feet, and his eyes turned red with anger. Almost all the pioneers who came here were the masters of their families, but they all fell at the feet of Dean. Even if he could kill Dean now, the dragon family would not be as strong as before. Moreover, his reason told him that if he continued to fight, he would also step into their path of retreat. "I don't want to kill you in front of her. Don't force me." Dean's eyes exuded monstrous killing intent. It seemed that the hostility hidden in his chest all broke out at this moment. However, he was still rational. He stared at Mudley and said, "If you surrender, I'll spare your whole family. If you resist, I'll kill every member of the dragon family." Mudley's face changed, and he said coldly, "How dare you? Even if I have to die with you, I'll kill you, despicable villain." Dean's eyes were full of killing intent. "Since you don't know life from death, don't blame me for being merciless." Then he suddenly turned around and rushed to the top of the mountain along the stairs. Seeing the direction Dean was going, Mudley's face changed, and he immediately chased after him. A large number of dragon family guards on the hillside had heard the news, and all of them were frontiersmen. Seeing Dean's horrifying demonic figure rushing over, these frontiersmen were frightened, but they still waved their weapons and rushed over. Dean's eyes were cold, and there was only the top of the mountain in his eyes. He rushed along the stairs. As he approached these guards, his sharp limbs stretched out, and with his impact, a large number of guards who were besieging him fell down. Their bodies were cut into pieces, and their intestines, hands, and heads were scattered on the ground. Blood flowed and dyed the hillside steps red. It was like purgatory. Dean did not stop, and he quickly went up. There were several waves of guard along the way, but he ignored them. He just stretched out his sharp limbs and beheaded the guards who tried to get close to him. The advantage of Splitter's magic mark could be reflected in group battles. The shape of the strange blade was perfect, and it was very suitable for the chaotic group battle to cause double the damage. In the blink of an eye, Dean reached the top of the mountain. Mudley chased after him, but the distance between them was not shortened. Dean's eyes swept the whole top of the mountain, and he didn't see any heat source of other pioneers. But soon, he saw a lot of figures gathered in a hall on the top of the mountain, and it seemed that they were having a meeting. He immediately rushed to the hall, and with a bang, he kicked the door open. There were dozens of senior dragon family members sitting in the hall. Their body heat was ordinary, and they seemed to be senior civil servants responsible for all aspects of the dragon family's affairs. Seeing that the door was suddenly kicked open, everyone in the hall stood up in fear. They had already received the news that there was an invasion at the foot of the mountain. Many of them were worried that the invaders were coming to attack the dragon family, so they had been waiting here uneasily. Dean kicked the door open like thunder, and everyone was startled. After all, they did not have the ability to perceive Dean's fast-approaching figure in advance. After Dean kicked the door open, his eyes passed the panicked senior dragon family members and fell on the top of the hall. He was slightly stunned. There was a dark golden coffin, about 5 meters high. His eyes were blocked by the coffin, and he couldn't penetrate it. But he observed the heat response in his eyes and found that the temperature around the coffin was extremely low. The 2 guards standing next to the coffin wore the same armor as the limitless guards outside, but their body heat source was only at the hunter level, and they seemed to be shivering with cold. Chapter 785. Whoosh! A gust of wind came from behind. Dean quickly bent down and pushed the sword in front of his chest. He moved horizontally to avoid the attack. Patriarch is here. The people in the hall were relieved to see Mudley appear at the door and repel Dean. They immediately ordered the guards to protect the dragon coffin. Mudley's face was gloomy as he looked at Dean. Where did you get the magic marks? Did she give it to you? Dean stood up and looked at him. Is Dragon Mother dead? Mudley's eyes slightly flashed. If she's the old lady, then it will be the sorrow of the entire Sylvia giant wall. Who else can resist the invaders except her? Only a stupid and despicable villain like you would expect such a thing to happen. Really? Dean ignored his sarcasm. She is in the coffin. I can feel it. If you don't tell me, I'll open it myself. Don't you dare. Mudley's eyebrows rose as he stepped in front of Dean. Do you think you can stop me? Dean looked at him coldly. Mudley roared and rushed forward. When he was close to the attack range of Dean's monster limbs, he suddenly moved to Dean's side. His abdomen bulged as he opened his mouth to spit out a blazing dragon flame. Dean had previously suffered from the dragon's breath, so he was already on guard at this moment. The moment his abdomen bulged, he knew that he was going to use the dragon's breath technique. When his mouth was slightly open, Dean suddenly squatted down and swept his sharp blade across his legs. The blazing dragon's breath rubbed over Dean's head, but didn't hit him. On the contrary, Mudley's demonized legs were cut by the monster limbs. Blood spurted out. Mudley staggered back 2 steps. There was anger in his eyes. He roared and rushed towards Dean. Dean was startled as he saw the trace of madness in Mudley's eyes. He had a bad feeling and hurriedly retreated, but it was not convenient to retreat. Mudley soon caught up with him and closed to within 3 meters of him. This was also the attack range of Mudley's strange limbs. Without hesitation, he brandished his sharp blade and shot out. So, like a rain of arrows whistling, Dean's sharp limbs pierced into Mudley's body, penetrating his shoulders, chest, arms, abdomen, and other parts. Dean was startled as he didn't expect that Dean wouldn't dodge. In the next moment, his pupils constricted, and he revealed a trace of astonishment. Mudley opened his mouth slightly, and an extremely intense heat gathered in his mouth. The surrounding air was slightly distorted from the heat. It was definitely more than 1,000 degrees. He could not imagine how the human body could produce such a terrifying flame. Who? Dragon breath spewed out. The blazing fire was reflected in Dean's pupils. He felt as if he was about to be swallowed by the fire. The feeling of death made his hair stand on end. He wanted to pull out his sharp limbs to dodge, but it was too late. Who? Dragon breath flame enveloped Dean's face and chest and swept to his upper body. Shrill screams sounded in the flame. Dean's sharp limbs were burned and twisted. He struggled violently and immediately tore Mudley into pieces. Organs and limbs scattered on the ground. The flame was attached to Dean's face and chest, burning fiercely, just like the flame on his magic wings. Dean fell to the ground, rolling in pain. This time the pain was dozens of times more than the last time. The nerve endings on the magic wings were weak, so the feeling was not sensitive, but the face and chest were the places where the nerves were concentrated. The burning pain almost made his spirit collapse. He repeatedly rolled on the ground, trying to put out the flame. However, the dragon breath flame was a mixture of high-concentration fat and bile oil in Mudley's body. It could burn continuously. Even if it was spat on a metal plate, it could continue to burn for dozens of seconds until the high-fat oil in the flame was completely burned out. Screams that sounded like the screams of evil spirits rang out in the flames, and they continued without end, causing everyone in the hall to feel their scalps go numb and their bodies go cold. They stared blankly at Mudley's body scattered in front of Dean. They didn't expect that their patriarch would die like this. A long time passed. The blood-curdling screams seemed to have lasted for a century, but as the flames weakened, the screams also gradually stopped. The flame was completely extinguished. Outside, the hall fell into silence. Only the deep, rough breathing could be heard. Inside the hall, there was also dead silence. Everyone looked out of the hall in horror, their faces pale. It was difficult to accept this fact. Slowly, a low laugh sounded outside the hall, like the grin of a devil. Then, a terrifying figure with sharp blades all over its body slowly climbed up and walked into the hall. Its trembling body seemed like it would collapse at any time. Seeing that the intruder hadn't died yet, everyone's eyes widened in fear. A few of them stood in a daze for a moment before gritting their teeth and standing in front of the others. The obstacle is finally removed. There was a strange smile on Dean's face. He was basically convinced that Dragon Mother was in the coffin. There was no sign of life. It was a bit like a memorial service. If Dragon Mother was dead, it meant that the goal he had been pursuing was finally in front of him. He slowly walked into the hall. There was only the coffin in his eyes. "Stop! Go to hell!" A series of angry shouts resounded. Although they were civil servants, there was no place for them to retreat. Some of them angrily rushed towards Dean to stop him. However, they couldn't get close to Dean's side. Dean's sharp limbs swept through their bodies. Their bodies were either cut in the waist or pierced through the chest. No one was able to get close to Dean. The others who were standing in the back were aghast as they saw the scene. At this moment, Dean was an arrow at the end of its flight and could fall at any time. They didn't expect him to have such terrifying strength. "Kill! Don't let him get close to Dragon Mother. Follow me." Roars resounded one after another. Under the pressure of the desperate situation of life and death, the crowd was forced to be courageous, and they rushed towards Dean one after another. It was a tragic scene. Dean's footsteps didn't stop. He continued to move forward step by step. The people who rushed towards him were cut off as soon as they stepped into his attack range. Severed limbs and blood flew around his body. Chapter 786. Dean felt the amazing chill emanating from the coffin. Under this chill, the burn pain on his face and chest seemed to lighten a lot. He took a deep breath and slowly lifted the sharp blade limb in front of his chest to resist the coffin. The chill spread from the tip and seemed to freeze his body. He gathered a little strength and stabbed out the sharp blade. The coffin was made of metal, but under the cutting of the sharp limbs, a gap was immediately cut out. A large amount of white cold air gushed out from the inside and rushed to Dean. The surrounding temperature seemed to plummet to the freezing point. Whoosh! Whoosh! The sharp limb quickly cut the coffin. The cold air spread to the surroundings. When the cold air almost dissipated, a beast-like figure emerged from the coffin. It was Dragon Mother. She was still in her demonized state when she fought with the invaders, but her body was covered with a layer of frost. She had turned into an ice sculpture without any signs of life. Dean was stunned. He was almost sure that this was Dragon Mother and not a fabricated sculpture. The charm between her eyebrows and her hair were lifelike, but there was no heat coming from her body. Dean saw through her body that her internal organs, blood, and heart were all in a frozen state. He He was stunned for half a second before he suddenly realized what was going on. The sharp blade-like limb in front of his chest quickly swung out. After a few clangs, the Dragon Mother ice sculpture was broken into pieces. Its head fell to the ground, but did not shatter as easily as ordinary ice cubes. Dean felt relieved after destroying the ice sculpture of Dragon Mother. Even if Dragon Mother wasn't dead, she was completely dead now. It meant that the only Dominator level in the inner wall was erased. The remaining Masters in the inner Baron level were nothing to worry about. He had planned for so long. He had done all kinds of bad things and sacrificed countless people. Glenn, who was next to him, also died in the execution of the mission. All of this was finally over. Ha ha ha. He laughed softly. His laughter was getting louder and louder until it spread throughout the hall. Since Hai Sha turned into a corpse, he had never laughed except in front of her. But at this moment, he laughed without any image. It even sounded a little crazy. I thought you were seriously injured, but I didn't expect that after using the power of the ice blood disease, you would turn into an ice sculpture and be completely crystallized. Is this the sequela of the ice blood disease? No wonder you didn't show this power before and didn't rely on this power to expand the power of the Dragon Clan and completely overpower the Rock Clan and the Wing Clan. It turns out that this power will lead to death. Dean looked at the scattered ice sculpture fragments on the ground and muttered to himself with a bitter smile. Several people hiding in the corner of the hall showed fear and anger in their eyes when they saw Dean destroy the ice sculpture of Dragon Mother. But in the end, there was only despair. One of them stood up from the corner and rushed toward Dean with grief and indignation. Dean didn't look back. As the man approached, he threw out a blade-like limb from his back and pierced through the man's roaring mouth, penetrating his head. This bloody scene made the faces of the remaining people turn pale. Dean slowly turned around, walked down the steps, and walked toward the people hiding in the corner of the hall. He stopped in front of an older man and said in a hoarse voice, "Has Dragon Mother been like this since she came back?" The old man looked at Dean in horror. His legs were trembling, and he said in a trembling voice, "Please, don't kill me. Answer me." Dean stared at him. The old man trembled and said hurriedly, "Dragon Mother's ice poison went deep into her bone marrow. In order to take back the god's corpse and kill the invaders, she didn't hesitate to stimulate the power of the ice poison. After she came back, she became like this. She didn't even have a chance to explain her funeral." Dean confirmed the idea in his heart. Dragon Mother's appearance was the same as when she fought with the invaders. Perhaps her body was irreparable when she was frozen to repel the invaders. That was why she maintained her demonized appearance even after she lost consciousness and life. It was because her frozen body made it impossible for her to remove the demonization. "Did you put her in the coffin to bury her? Did she die like this?" Dean asked. The old man's face was covered in cold sweat as he bowed his head. This we don't know. Although such a situation has happened before, but the records are not clear. I only heard that if the ice poison breaks out, the whole body will freeze and all the body tissues will turn into ice cubes and lose consciousness. There is a possibility that the body will melt in a high-temperature environment. At that time, consciousness may be restored and life will come back. But this is just a hearsay. No one knows whether it is true or false. Is there a possibility of restoring consciousness? Dean couldn't help but turn his head to look at the scattered pieces of Dragon Mother under the coffin. He thought that even if her body was thawed, it would be useless. You are a hero and a hero among women. At least you are much stronger than the others. Dean said in his heart. If he wasn't there, Dragon Mother would have used her life to repel the invaders and recapture the god's corpse. This story would be spread for hundreds of years and become a legend. However, if he won the power of the Wall Lord, then he was destined to erase this glorious record, and the name of the hero would be hung on his name. After all, he also needed a positive image, one that was praised and respected by people. Moreover, he was the one who killed the invaders, so it wasn't false. However, the real hero was covered up and turned into dust. He slowly disappeared in the river of time. When the power is big enough, you can cover the sky with one hand. It turns out that the sky that is covered isn't the sky that is high up in the sky, but the people. Dean had some feelings in his heart, but this feeling made him sigh. He didn't feel happy at all. Instead, he felt empty. He slowly turned around and dragged his exhausted body out of the hall step by step. Then he went along the hillside towards Aisha. Aisha was still quietly standing on the square. She was surrounded by a large number of ordinary guards, but they didn't dare to approach her. Some of them had recognized Aisha's identity, but repeatedly questioned her. Whoosh! Dean swept past like a hurricane. The crowd that surrounded Aisha was quickly torn apart. Blood splashed, and limbs fell to the ground. The rest of the guards saw the monster that suddenly appeared next to Aisha. They were scared and retreated a few steps. Their faces were aghast. It wasn't surprising that they were so surprised. Dean's demonized body image was too horrifying. In addition, his face and chest were burned. He was like a ghost that crawled out of hell. His appearance alone was enough to frighten everyone. Dean didn't pay attention to these ordinary guards. He held Aisha's waist and whispered, "Let's go back. I'll find a way to treat you soon." Aisha was silent and didn't respond. Chapter 787. Dean returned to the outer wall area after a few hours. He went straight to the second base. The second base was located in a secluded area in the western part of the commercial district. The Dark Believers had massacred several villages in this area, causing the area to become deserted. Now, Dean chose this place as the second base. It was a sparsely populated area. It was convenient for him to arrange wind power stations and solar panels. Moreover, it was not far from Utopo Mountain. Dean flew back to the second base. He saw Sergei, Gwyneth, Noyce, and others. In addition, Siam Manson and Poland were busy in a laboratory. He slowly descended from the air. The sensors in the base lit up as they sensed his life fluctuations. The intelligence department immediately passed the news to Noyce. Noyce saw Dean descending from the sky when he received the news. He immediately went to greet him. "Master, you." Noyce was about to ask about Dean's situation, but he was stunned when he saw Dean's face. At this moment, Dean had removed the demonic body, but the high temperature of the dragon's breath had penetrated the demonic skin and burned the skin inside. So Dean's face looked extremely frightening. Half of his face was completely disfigured. In addition, his chest was also burned and covered with flesh and blood. The flesh and blood were slightly red, as if the blood had solidified in the rotten flesh. "Has Richelieu dealt with the explosion in Utopo Mountain?" Dean asked. Noyce hurriedly said, "He has dealt with it. He has temporarily controlled the situation and blocked the news. He has also asked the newspapers to report the scandals of other well-known figures and nobles. But this is only temporary. He is waiting for your reply. He wants to see how tomorrow's news will explain the explosion. Just say that was a terrorist disaster caused by the dark cultists. But the cultists who caused the disaster have been brought to justice. Let Hawkeye catch a few refugees to act as terrorists and execute them in public." Dean casually said. It seemed that he was prepared for this as he walked towards the main hall. Noyce nodded. He had been following Dean for a long time, so he could guess some of Dean's thoughts. Obviously, it was the easiest way to let the Dark Believers take the blame, although it would inevitably bring a certain degree of panic to the general public. After all, the headquarters of the Holy Church was destroyed, but it would create a strong image of the Holy Church once again. "Master, your injury." There was a trace of worry in Noyce's eyes. He was more concerned about Dean and the movements of the inner wall. These were the key to the survival of all of them. Dean found a chair and sat down. He let out a sigh of relief as he took a rest in his own territory. Dean touched his face as he heard Noyce's words. His smooth skin was bumpy. A small part of his skin was abnormally smooth, but the shape was raised and the pores were melted. "It's nothing. Didn't I come back alive?" Dean's attitude was calm. There was no anger in his tone. "But your face, it's nothing. It's good if I can recover. If not, then it's just skin." Dean indifferently said, "It's a small matter as long as it doesn't affect combat effectiveness." Noyce's lips slightly moved, But in the end, he smiled bitterly in his heart and no longer persuaded. If it was an ordinary person, even a powerful person would inevitably feel angry. After all, disfigurement was hard for most people to accept. This could be seen from those powerful women who were looking for beauty pills everywhere. Moreover, women weren't the only ones who needed beauty pills. "Give me some healing medicine," Dudian called out. Noyce nodded and immediately left. After a moment, he came back with a medicine box. He opened it and saw many bottles and jars neatly stacked inside. The effects covered various aspects. There were antidotes, hemostatic drugs, bone recovery drugs, and so on. There were also life-saving drugs that could make a dying person gasp for 2 breaths. But the effect of these drugs was only to make a person gasp for 2 breaths. Dean picked out a few bottles and opened them. He took the pills and potions one by one. He quietly closed his eyes and rested. Noyce saw that Dean was healing, so he silently retreated with the medicine box. Dean suddenly said, "Drive the chariot over and bring Haley to see me." Noyce was startled. He nodded and silently retreated. Half an hour later, an ancient chariot rolled over and stopped outside the main hall. 6 figures were tied to the ropes outside the chariot. Besides Ronan and Hero, there were also ordinary pioneers who were subdued by Dean. As for the magic scorpion war god and the monastery's elders, they were still resisting. Dean didn't have time to subdue them, so they were still in the dungeon without being tied to the chariot. "Go in," Noyce shouted. A figure with disheveled hair was pushed into the hall. Dean slowly opened his eyes and looked at the figure who was sitting on the ground. In just over a month, the embarrassed figure in front of him was completely different from the arrogant and proud Hathaway. He saw that her clothes were tattered and torn. Her clothes were stained with a strong masculine smell. Her chest and thighs were faintly discernible. She used to be neatly combed and sprayed with high-grade perfume, but at the moment she was scattered and full of the smell of dandruff and sebum. Hathaway seemed to have adapted to the dirty environment. She didn't mind the carpet and just sat there. She was too lazy to get up. She looked at Dean and sneered. "Do you want to see me beg for mercy in front of you? Unfortunately, unless you tie my hands and feet, pinch my face, and force me to make such a posture, you will never see such a picture." Dean quietly looked down at her and said, "Today, I went to your dragon clan." Haley was startled. She noticed the terrible burn marks on Dean's face and chest. Her face slightly changed. With Dean's strength, it was most likely the dragon clan's dragon breath that could burn him like this. This meant that Dean had fought with the patriarch or the dragon mother. In addition to her, only the 2 of them had the magic marks of the dragon clan. "It seems that you were lucky to escape. Now you know that my dragon clan isn't a place that people like you can step into, right?" Haley sneered. Dean quietly looked at her, said, "Dragon Mother is dead. Your father is also dead. Today, in addition to the pioneers in the wasteland, there are basically no pioneers in the Giant Wall. It can be said that your dragon clan has been abolished." Haley was stunned. "Take her away," Dean said to Noyce next to him. Haley responded and sneered. "Nonsense. If you say that you can deal with my father, I can believe it. But you want to deal with the Dragon Mother? The Dragon Mother is the previous saint of the Dragon Clan. She is outstanding and not worse than my sister. As early as 30 years ago, she was already an inner wasteland master." Dudian didn't say a word, as if he hadn't heard anything. Noyce dragged Hathaway out. "Nonsense. You want to deceive me? Ridiculous." Haley shouted. Her voice came from outside the hall. Dean quietly looked at the front and didn't respond. Chapter 788. Dean asked Noyce to bring the god's marrows when he returned to the hall. "Master, about the inner wall." Noyce took the god's marrow and retreated to the side as he asked cautiously. Dean poured the god's marrows into the syringe and injected it into his body. "The danger in the inner wall has been eliminated. The invaders have died in our hands. There won't be anyone blocking our way if there is no accident." He looked at Noyce. "Remember to block the news that we killed the invaders. We can't let the inner wall know about it. They won't dare to attack us as long as they don't know that the invaders are dead. This is the safest time for us." We will continue to follow the previous pace. Once my physique is further improved, we will be able to dominate the inner wall. Noyce was startled. There was an incredible look in his eyes. It seemed that they had the victory in their hands, but it was just a matter of time. However, he found that there was not much joy on Dean's face, and he could not help but feel nervous. Now his status was different, and his knowledge was broader. Although he knew that Dean would not deceive him, with his understanding of Dean, if it was necessary, this boy could deceive and use everyone around him. He didn't dare to think too much as he didn't want to expose his thoughts. He knew that Dean's observation ability was very good, so he respectfully retreated. Dean injected the god's marrow into his body. Although he had done this many times, but he felt strange every time he did it. Only the sick needed to be injected into the body. He wasn't sick, but he was doing the things that the sick would do. It made him feel that he was really sick. Moreover, it was not a light disease. As the saying goes, people often have a lot of emotions in times of great joy and sorrow. They would even reminisce about their lives. Dean's mood was neither happy nor sad at the moment. He knew that sooner or later he would dominate the inner wall. All the obstacles had been removed. He just needed time to push him to the supreme throne. He didn't feel the slightest joy in his heart as he thought about becoming the ruler of Sylvia's wall. He didn't feel the slightest joy in his heart. He felt that he had seen too many people. He had seen people from all walks of life, from humble orphans in slums to ordinary civilians, rich merchants, aristocrats who were banished to the outer wall to entertain themselves. He had seen the real nobles in the inner wall who were conferred titles by the kingdom of God. He had seen the patriarchs of the hunting families and the leaders of the monastery. After seeing so many of them, he realized that the difference between these people wasn't that great. He felt that perhaps he had seen through everything. It would be boring if you saw through everything. It would be separated if you saw through a person. It would be wearying if you saw through everyone. Dean felt that he belonged to the last category. He was somewhat tired of the world. Even when he was with people, he could see through their thoughts at a glance. He could even easily make others happy and cry. He also knew that some people were respectful to him, which made him happy. But to others, he might be arrogant and disgusting. Everyone has a good side and an ugly side. He had seen it all. Even such thoughts would fill his mind all the time. It made him feel bored. Sometimes he even felt that his thoughts were too extreme. Extreme could easily lead to destruction. But he felt that only extreme ways could be used to verify the truth of the world and tear apart the hypocrisy. He tried to give an example and succeeded in convincing himself. Wait until I find a way to restore you. We'll find a deserted place where only the two of us can live. What do you say? Dean looked at Aisha with tender and pitiful eyes. Occasionally, when he slept, he would fantasize about living with her on a golden beach. That kind of life was enough for him. He didn't want to pay attention to other people and things. It was too complicated, and he felt a little tired. Aisha didn't answer, but in Dean's eyes, it was a tacit agreement. He smiled and gently held her hand. The longer the time, the stronger I will be. I believe that it won't be long before I can see what kind of secrets are hidden in the giant wall. The next day, Dean called Noyce and asked him to gather a group of loyal people from the Dark Church. Noyce took the order. 2 days later, a group of 50 people was gathered. All of them were selected by Noyce. The previous intruder stole the god's corpse from the inner wall. The 6 of them didn't bring the god's corpse when they fought with the inner wall. It should be hidden somewhere. Take some people to search and start from the outer wall. Duddian said. Noyce suddenly woke up and curiously asked, Master, what is the use of the god's corpse? It's worth for them to come all the way to snatch it. It's like finding a needle in a haystack compared to the area of the giant wall. The possibility of finding it should be very low. They won't hide too far because they have worked hard to get it. I also want to know what the use of the god's corpse is. But from the current situation, the god's corpse should still be in the giant wall. Duddian said, Remember to make them move in stealth. Don't expose them. I know. Noyce didn't ask any more and nodded. Time flew by. 1.5 months passed in the blink of an eye. The drizzle moistened the earth. The whole base was shrouded in drizzle. Dean quietly looked at the dark clouds outside the window. He could almost see the hidden lightning snakes in the clouds. After a long time, the rain gradually stopped. He slowly got up and looked at Aisha. "You have a good rest here. I'm going to the inner wall. I believe I'll be back soon." Aisha's pure black eyes seemed to be staring at a certain point in the air. She didn't respond. Dean smiled and turned away. Noyce was waiting for him at the entrance of the hall. "Master, your chariot is ready. Do you really want to go to the inner wall alone?" Chapter 789. Dean's feet moved slightly. It was as if there was a force behind him that sent him to the chariot. He stood in the back of the chariot and said in a low voice, "Go to the inner wall, full speed." Hero, Ronan, and the others, who were tied to the side of the chariot, heard the order. They raised their heads and revealed a pair of gloomy eyes through their messy hair. They aimed in a certain direction, and with Hero and Ronan in the lead, they pulled the chariot forward. The others pulled the chariot from the side and ran forward in a fan shape. The chains clanked, and the chariot's wheels moved under their pull. Soon, the chariot rushed out of the base and came to the wasteland. All the way forward, they met a shallow stream. They directly crossed it and hit the water like 12 angry beasts. Their expressions were numb. They were like puppets. Their willpower had long been weak under the erosion of the poison pin. They obediently followed such treatment without dignity. They met a mountain and crossed it. They met a dense forest and broke through it. Dean stood on the chariot with his sword. His eyes passed through the rainy sky and looked straight at the wall that was gradually revealed in front of him. The area near the wall that was destroyed by the gunpowder had been surrounded and blocked by the Knights of Light. During this time, many nobles had secretly visited the Holy Church and sent a lot of valuable gifts. They wanted to gain accommodation and let them sneak into the inner wall. But most of them were rejected. Dean didn't enter from the gap. Now, it was the focus of the whole commercial district. All the forces had sent their eyes to observe it. He didn't want to cause any trouble, so he let Hero and others pull the chariot directly from another direction. When they arrived in front of the wall, the elders of the monastery and the other pioneers immediately spread their wings. Some of them used their crawling ability to pull the chariot directly to the wall. The others flew in the air and used the chains to pull the chariot. The others who didn't have the ability to climb over the high wall grabbed the chains and fished behind the chariot. Under the joint efforts of the pioneers, the steep wall of size was easily crossed as if they were walking on flat ground, and their speed was not reduced at all. "Go to King's City," Dean ordered. Hearing this, a few of them trembled slightly, as if they knew something, but they lowered their heads and continued to pull the carts. The chariot sped through the wasteland, occasionally encountering one or two wandering corpses. Hero and Ronan, who were in charge of the main direction, casually killed them. Along the way, they passed by the borders of several cities, directly passing through the front of King's City. It seems that the invaders haven't been eliminated, and the god corpses haven't been retrieved. They don't even have the mood to pacify the corpses. Dean noticed that there were troops in several cities along the way, but the number was small. The broken fortresses were not repaired. It was a mess. "Go to the palace and kill anyone who blocks the way," Dudian said in a cold voice. Everyone hesitated as they heard Dean's words. But Hero and Ronan, who were at the front, pulled the chariot again after a short moment of hesitation. The others had to keep up with them. The chariot charged towards the city gate. The people lining up in front of the city gate were all stunned when they saw the chariots whizzing past. Especially when they saw that the people pulling the chariots were actually people, they felt that it was even more inconceivable. They immediately retreated to the side. In their impression, only nobles with high status could make such a scene. "Stop! Stop! Who are you? Stop!" The guards at the city gate were surprised to see the chariot rushing towards them. But they saw that there was no family flag on the chariot, so they bit the bullet in order to stop. The chariot didn't have the slightest intention to slow down. The guards were shocked as they saw the chariot. They held their weapons and stood in front of the city gate. The next moment, Hero and Ronan, who were at the very front, quickly attacked and sent the guards flying. Some of the guard were struck in the chest by a single palm strike, and their entire chest armor caved in. Their bones and hearts were shattered. "Stop! Don't! Someone is trying to break in. Stop them!" The guards behind the city gate were shocked and scared when they saw Dean and the others rushing towards them. Some of them sounded the alarm. Dean looked indifferent and didn't respond. He looked straight ahead. The chariot sped all the way, killing or repelling the guards in front of it. The guard were as fragile as paper in front of the 12 pioneers. The chariot quickly rushed into the king's city and sped along the street. The pedestrians on the road were shocked and gave way. There were nobles who were riding carriages in the middle of the road, observing the scenery of the shops on the side of the road. They couldn't dodge in time. Hero lifted the carriage with one hand and threw it several meters high. It fell on the side of the road and smashed into pieces. No one knew if the people inside were dead or alive. The chariot swept away all the clouds in its path. No one was spared. Dean stood firmly with the sword in his hand. The structure of the chariot was very strong. The body of the chariot bounced when it ran over the bodies of some passers-by, but it didn't suffer any damage. The scenery of the streets of the king's city quickly passed by Dean's eyes. The screams of the pedestrians and the shocked faces of some nobles were also passed by the chariot. He saw many scenes that he hadn't seen in the outer wall, but he wasn't in the mood to appreciate them. He squinted his eyes and concentrated, waiting for the battle that was coming soon. Half an hour later, the chariot rushed to the front of the palace. A large number of powerful guards gathered at the bottom of the steps in front of the palace. They were all Lemiders. They seemed to have received the news long ago and had set up a military formation here in advance. When the chariot arrived, a few figures came out from the steps of the palace and looked down at Dean on the chariot. Standing in the center was Yulida. Next to her was a military commander, Yamos. Originally, there were 3 commanders, but now he was the only one left. The other 2 had died in the battle at the Pagel Mountains, and the other had died in the ambush at King City. In addition to Yamos, there were 4 or 5 generals. All of them had powerful auras and were pioneers. "Dean, do you have to choose this time to attack my king's city and seize my royal power?" Yulida jumped down. Her figure was light. She passed 1,000 steps in the blink of an eye and arrived at the height of the 30th step. Looking at Dean, who was exuding a majestic aura on the chariot, there was a trace of fear in the depths of her eyes. Compared to last time, she felt that Dean's temperament had changed. He was stronger, more restrained, and more composed than before. Chapter 790. Eureka's cheeks turned red. "What nonsense are you talking about?" At this time, Yamos and other generals rushed to Eureka's side. Yamos saw the 12 figures tied to Dean's chariot. His face changed as he exclaimed, "Hero, Ronan." Hero and Ronan, who were in front of the chariot, trembled as they heard Yamos's call. They lowered their heads even more. Eureka reacted as the blush on her face faded away. She looked at the figure tied to the chariot. There was a trace of fear in her eyes. "Dean, what did you do to them? Were you the one who broke into the Dragon Clan a month and a half ago? Do you know that the invaders could come back at any time without Dragon Mother? Do you think you can get the royal power by colluding with the invaders? You are seeking your own destruction. Dragon Mother has frozen and died. What can she do if the invaders come back?" Dean looked indifferent, as his words were tantamount to admitting it. Eureka knew that it was Dean, but she couldn't help but feel great anger in her heart when she heard him admit it. She gritted her teeth. "You are worse than a pig or a dog. Do you know that the invaders have stolen the god's corpse? Without the god's corpse, we will all be destroyed. Even if you get the supreme power, you will still die. Do you think you are smart? You are too stupid." Dean was indifferent and didn't speak. Seeing his expression, Eureka became even more furious. She said angrily, "Although Dragon Mother was frozen, it was only temporary. I have something from the divine nation that can help her break the ice and revive her. But you killed her and destroyed her body. She can't be resurrected anymore. When the invaders come, you and I will die in their hands. Even if they don't kill you, you will still die if they take the god's corpse. Don't scare me. What does it have to do with my life if they take the god's corpse? Dean didn't believe it. Eureka gritted her teeth. Why do you think those horrible things in the abyss haven't wandered to the giant wall? Do you think they're relying on the devil family to defend the wasteland? There are scarecrows in front of those horrible things. If there is no Sylvia god of war's corpse guarding the giant wall, then sooner or later these things will come to the giant wall. With our population here in front of them, it is simply a big meal. Even if my father comes back, he may not be able to protect everyone. Dean was startled. Although he expected a catastrophe when the god's corpse left the giant wall, he didn't think it would lead to the abyss. No wonder they value the god's corpse so much. Eureka looked at Dean's dazed expression. She was angry that Dean didn't live up to her expectations. She wouldn't have publicly revealed such a secret if they hadn't lost the god's corpse. But she knew that even if she revealed it, it was a foregone conclusion. Dragon Mother was dead. This was something that couldn't be changed. Dean didn't know this in advance. He colluded with the invaders and killed Dragon Mother. He completely ruined their hope. It was so stupid that Eureka hated him to the point of powerlessness. It seems that my guess is right. The god's corpse is still in the giant wall. Dudian thought in his heart. 1.5 months had passed, but there were no monsters attacking the giant wall. It meant that the immortal's corpse was still here. Unfortunately, the people he had sent hadn't found the whereabouts of the immortal's corpse. The place where the invaders hid the immortal's corpse was a bit remote. However, once he took control of the inner wall, he would send pioneers who were good at perception to search. He should be able to find it soon. Bastard, get off the carriage and die. Yamo shouted at Dean. What he called Hero and Ronan, they didn't answer him. He knew that most of them were controlled by Dean. This made him angry. Hero used to be his subordinate. He watched him grow step by step to become the god of war. He didn't expect that Hero would end up in such a miserable situation and become a coachman. Dean glanced at him and wanted to say something. However, he suddenly thought that it was not convincing to ask them to surrender now. After all, they had to suffer before they were willing to admit defeat. He immediately stopped talking. He was too lazy to waste his breath. He drove the chariot, shouted, and rushed toward Yulida and Yamos. Seeing that Dean directly attacked, Hero, Ronan, and the other pioneers pulled the chariot and rushed over. Yamos, Yulida, and the other generals were slightly startled. They felt a chill and sadness in their hearts. Yamos's eyes were slightly red. He roared and stimulated his demon body. He took the lead and jumped toward Dean on the chariot. Dean didn't use the iron chain protection net on the chariot. He could only use the life and death of Hero and the others to restrain them. However, the purpose of his trip was to flatten this place. He stood on the chariot. The splitter in his hand quickly melted and flowed into his body. The terrifying and ferocious demon body appeared. Compared to the demon body when he was a pioneer, the current demon body looked more ferocious and complete. Even his face was covered with a hard carapace. If there was a mirror, Dean could see that his eyes were no longer the black and white eyes of a human. Instead, the whites of his eyes had turned black, and the eyeballs had turned into strange yellow eyes. After entering the demon body, the things that Dean saw were completely different from before. His field of vision was always maximized, and he could see through everything at any time. Even Yamos, who was flying over, could see the flesh, bones, and blood vessels in his body. He could also see the thumping of his heart. He felt that his thoughts had become unprecedentedly clear, fast, and calm. There was only the consciousness of hunting and killing left in his heart. Under this consciousness, he could see the flaw revealed by Yamos at a glance. This flaw was not revealed on the surface of his body, but on a bone under his armpit. This bone was the weakest joint of his whole body. There were only 2 small bones as a support, indicating that this was the weakest place to exert force. Go to hell. Yamos's demon body was like a crocodile and a lizard. He roared and swung his claws toward Dean's head. The sharp blade-like limbs on Dean's shoulder seemed to be attracted by a magnet. They stood erect. The ferocious and sharp blades reflected the cold luster, not the slightest bit afraid of the claws. At the same time, a blade-like limb suddenly shot out from Dean's back. The moment the two approached, it stabbed toward Yamo's armpit. The surface was covered with cyan scales, which were extremely tough and harder than most steel armors. Because of this, when Yamo saw Dean's terrifying demon body shape, he still dared to pounce. But the moment the blade-like limb stabbed out, Yamos felt an alert crisis. He wanted to turn his body, but it was too late. The next moment, a sharp pain came from his armpit, straight into his bone marrow. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.